141. Hogwarts Letters and Headmaster. On August 1st, Ada had the day off from the leaky cauldron. She always took one day a week to relax. When she came back last night, she'd given Ginny Harry Potter's autograph for her 10th birthday. Ginny had been delighted, chattering about Harry all night. They hadn't gone to bed until the small hours. Unsurprisingly, Ada overslept. By the time she and Ginny sat down in the kitchen for breakfast, everyone else was already there. The twins were unusually well behaved. Mrs. Weasley had discovered the mischief they'd been hiding in their room and had given them a proper telling off, so for now, they were on their best behavior. As soon as Ada sat down, the post owl arrived with a copy of the Daily Prophet. Percy, who was nearest the window and still with bed hair, took the mail and slipped 5 nuts into the little leather pouch on the owl's leg. He handed the newspaper to Mr. Weasley and began distributing the Hogwarts letters. Charlie hadn't received one this year, but Ron did. Ron opened his letter and checked the textbook list. The usual books, nothing surprising. Ada, however, had 3 extra elective choices this year, which meant buying Divinations Unfogging the Future, Care of Magical Creatures, Fantastic Beasts, and Where to Find Them, and the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. She was also interested in the Dictionary of Runes and the Book of Magical Symbols. Fred gave Ada's shoulder a fond pat and nodded toward Percy. Ada followed his gaze and saw Percy grinning like an idiot at his right hand, as if it had suddenly acquired some charm. "A prefect," Mrs. Weasley said, eyes bright as she looked at Percy's right hand. "Percy, is there anything you'd like as a present?" It was a family tradition. When the eldest Weasley boys reached 5th year, they'd receive a prefect badge, passed down from Bill to Charlie, then Charlie to Percy. In 2 years, Fred and George would reach 5th year too, if they were ever allowed to keep a badge. Both twins caught Ada looking at them. In perfect unison, they turned, 4 eyes fixed on her. "We would never do such a thing," Fred hissed. "We would never let that thing defile us," George whispered. Mrs. Weasley was already bubbling over with gift ideas for Percy and didn't notice their dangerous mutterings. If she had, the twins might not have seen tomorrow's sun. "Mom, I want to change pets. Scabbers is too old. How about an owl?" Percy suggested. He really did dislike Scabbers, that smelly rat, and he didn't feel a scruffy little dog named Galleon would befit a prefect. Before Mrs. Weasley could reply, George chipped in. "Mom, Ron's going to school this year too, and he needs even more things." Ron looked up, eyes hopeful. He'd been studying his long shopping list, knowing most of it would have to be secondhand, but if he could have any new items, he would choose new all the way. Ada was about to reach for her pouch. She had money she could offer, but she put her hand back under Mrs. Weasley's sharp look. Mrs. Weasley wouldn't take a single nut from Ada. Ada had been welcomed into the family for who she was, not for money. "Keep eating, Harry," Mr. Weasley said. "We'll find a way." They all knew what that way would mean. Bill's old robes, textbooks handed down from the twins or Ada, maybe even Charlie's worn wand. That wand had flaked badly. Ada doubted its unicorn core could even cast properly anymore. After breakfast, Ada and the twins carried buckets down to the little river outside the village. They didn't continue the Hogwarts talk at the table. Instead, they discussed the report in the Daily Prophet. "Who'd have the nerve to try and rob Gringotts?" Fred said. He didn't mean for the robber's sake. He admired anyone with that kind of nerve. News that Gringotts had been forced open had broken the previous afternoon, while Ada had been at the leaky cauldron. Witnesses said the goblins had failed to catch the intruder, who got away. Some reports claimed the thief stole a great deal of gold from deep vaults. Others suggested treasures were taken. Whatever the truth, everyone agreed something previously thought impossible had happened. Someone had forced their way into Gringotts and escaped. The goblins themselves admitted an intrusion, but claimed nothing was stolen. The Daily Prophet had printed that line as well. "Whether he stole anything or not," George said, "getting in and out like that proves he's no ordinary person." He rolled up his trousers and waded into the stream to fish. Ada perched on a rock and did the same. "I hope he's a heroic thief," Ada said, trying to snag a fish that slipped away each time she reached, the sort who robs the rich to help the poor. "If I woke up tomorrow with a sack of galleons at my bedside, I'd pray for him every day." Wake up! Stop dreaming! It's not night yet, the twins shouted together, splashing cold river water at her. The icy spray soaked her. She retaliated, and soon it was a full-scale water fight. The squabble only ended when all three were drenched. They splashed upstream to a quieter spot to try their luck at fishing again. Ada was a hopeless fisher. She'd rather perform an exploding charm and be done with it, but the conversation turned to the other big topic of the day, Professor Quirrell. I have a bad feeling about him, Ada said. He was in the leaky cauldron the day Gringotts was hit, and his odd behavior makes you suspicious. She fished with her hands and watched the fish dart away. It's too much of a coincidence, Fred agreed. He goes to Diagon Alley, and right then someone breaks into Gringotts. It's almost ridiculous. Fred, like Ada, hadn't caught a thing. If it really is him, then forget about your heroic thief, George said, casting a net. Quirrell doesn't strike me as the type to sacrifice himself for others. The idea of a wizard who trembled at the mention of vampires applying for the Defense Against the Dark Arts position didn't sit right with any of them. After school starts, we can keep an eye on Quirrell, George added. We'll use the Marauders map, just like in first year. Agreed. Professor or not, once school starts, we'll make sure Quirrell gets sorted out, Fred said, slapping the water. The fish were especially tricky that day, and the three of them returned to the burrow with empty buckets. Inside, they found Albus Dumbledore sitting on the sofa in the living room, telling stories to Ginny and Ron. Mrs. Weasley was in the kitchen preparing lunch. Professor, what brings you to the burrow? Ada asked. An old friend of mine happened to be free today, and I thought you should meet him, Dumbledore replied. But there's no rush. We can go after lunch. A small crowd gathered in the kitchen. Mrs. Weasley, Ron and Percy were a little formal, taking the headmaster's visit seriously. The twins were unfazed, jokes kept flying, and even made Dumbledore laugh. Ada and Ginny ate quietly, heads down. Ada wasn't especially curious. She'd find out soon enough. I've always heard Ada praise your cooking, Dumbledore said with a smile. And today I've tried it. Indeed, it's as good as she said. Right, Ada? Mrs. Weasley beamed and smoothed her apron. I'm glad you like it. These Harrys can cause you trouble sometimes, she said. I like them very much, Dumbledore continued. Every Weasley child has their own qualities, and that's down to you and Arthur. As for Ada, she's the one who's picked up mischief from somewhere. You've certainly had your hands full, Molly. They walked along a country lane, Dumbledore and Ada side by side, talking as they went. Dumbledore knew Ada could apparate, but this was too far for him to let her travel alone. The village they approached was the sort of place the word picturesque was invented for. Professor, where are we? Ada asked. Dorset, Dumbledore replied. An old friend of mine lives here. He was once my student. He wrote the textbook you'll be using next semester. Newt Scamander? Ada said uncertainly. Newt was the author of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the set text for Care of Magical Creatures. He was a scholar, uninterested in fame or power. Yes, Newt once extracted an obscurus, Dumbledore went on. I think he can help us. They turned down a narrow drive and came to what looked like a modest farm. From the outside, it might have belonged to any muggle, sensible brickwork, neat outbuildings, nothing like a wizarding house at all. Inside, though, it was another matter. The front room was a clutter of books, photographs, sketches, and jars, everything related to magical creatures. It was a cozy chaos of research and curiosity. 3 Kneasels shot out from under a table and leapt at Ada, their tails flicking inquisitively. Kneasels were fiercely intelligent. They didn't always take kindly to strangers, but once they liked a person, they were loyal companions and natural detectives of character. Owning one required a breeding permit. The Kneasels circled her happily. An elderly man with hair shot through with gray came up from the basement and laughed. Don't be scared. Hobby, Millie and Mahler are harmless, he said. I wondered when you'd arrive. We stopped for a bite on the way and ran a little late, Dumbledore said with a smile. This is Ada, Esmeralda Twister, whom I mentioned. Ada stepped forward and shook the man's hand. Hello, Mr. Scamander. I've read your book, and I'll be taking your class next term. Their hands touched and were quickly withdrawn. Newt's eyes flicked away. He wasn't unfriendly, simply unused to prolonged physical contact. She's very pretty, almost as pretty as Tina was when she was young, he said, a little awkward naivety in his voice. "You wouldn't have said that when you were young," a woman's voice called from the stairs. She was old now, but there was still a trace of youth in her face. She must be the Tina Newt had mentioned. She bustled around, setting out tea and pastries, but she didn't join the conversation. Instead, she went upstairs with the Noseless. Dumbledore set down a pastry. "I wrote about Ada's situation in my letter," he said. "We'd appreciate your help." Newt settled into a chair and looked at Ada. "Tell me what you remember of that night," he asked. Ada closed her eyes and reached for the memory buried so deep it had never been spoken aloud. Pain flooded through her as the memory came back, a roaring, tearing pressure inside her body, as if some violent thing tried to claw its way free, a hunger for destruction, then nothing, blackness. "I remember the power felt like it was tearing me apart," she said. "Like it wanted out. After that, I passed out. I don't remember what happened next." Dumbledore and Newt exchanged looks. "Your description makes the suspicion reasonable," Newt said slowly. "It sounds like an obscurus manifesting as enormous, uncontrolled force. But she doesn't feel like an obscurial now. She appears to be a highly capable young witch." Newt didn't sense the oppressive presence of an obscurus in Ada now. Those who understood obscuruses best were few, Albus Dumbledore, Gellert Grindelwald, and Newt Scamander among them, and two of the three had reason to be wary. The power of an obscurus was seductive and terrifying. The Ministry had feared it enough to act with brutal decisiveness. If that power could not be controlled, it was a danger to everything. "Both my exams and the healers at St. Mungo's found nothing," Dumbledore said. "Ada is a very ordinary person now. She doesn't carry the malevolent presence of an obscurus. I suspect she may have once hosted such a thing, but that the power dissipated after the outburst." "Have there been others like this?" Ada asked. Both men shook their heads. Newt explained, "Obscurials and obscuruses are usually bound together. Only when an obscurial dies does the obscurus typically dissipate. I once helped a girl separate from her obscurus, but she still died. After her death, the obscurus weakened and faded." A small, twig-like creature, one of Newt's bowtruckles, crept from his jacket pocket and peered up at him. Newt soothed it with a soft word. "Obscuruses are the result of extreme emotional suppression," he continued. "They tend to solve whatever torments them in the most extreme way." "But you're not an extreme person, Ada," Dumbledore said gently. "You can be impulsive, reckless at times, but you aren't driven to destruction. You think and reflect. Apart from that childhood incident, you don't match the characteristics of an obscurial." Hearing them, Ada felt something inside her settle. The idea that she might have once been the host of an obscurus made sense of the raw power she sometimes displayed, power far beyond that of most witches. Perhaps the original child named Ada had been the obscurial. Under terrible suppression, the obscurus had grown until the child could no longer endure it. When that child died at 10, the obscurus would have faded. In the strange continuity of her life, Ada herself had remained, changed, inheriting some fragment of that legacy, and it was that legacy that explained her unusual talent. Dumbledore and Newt had both considered the same possibility, but without Ada's private knowledge, they could not be certain. For Ada, though, the certainty was a relief. Hearing Newt's calm, informed assessment confirmed what she had long suspected. She was not a monster. There was nothing in her now that could not be guided and trained. Newt smiled and, as the conversation softened, launched into an enthusiastic account of his latest trip to Brazil and his observations of fire-dwelling salamanders. The afternoon slipped away in talk of beasts, tea, and pastries, and Ada felt the tightness in her chest loosen. She could grow at her own pace, under careful guidance, and when school began, special instruction would help her master whatever remained of that old power. 143. The problem is no money. It was already evening when Dumbledore brought Ada back to St. Catchpole. Newt and Tina kept them for dinner. Perhaps seeing Dumbledore made Newt unusually talkative. He even shared some of his travels with Ada. Newt's stories about magical creatures enthralled Ada, who hadn't seen much of the world. She found herself looking forward to Care of Magical Creatures class next term. St. Catchpole was exceptionally quiet at night. Ada walked with Dumbledore and told him about Quirrell. She felt Dumbledore's wisdom was like Einstein's among muggles. He could help her sort out her doubts about Quirrell, and she wanted to warn him to watch Quirrell more closely. Ada told Dumbledore everything she had noticed at the Leaky Cauldron and her own suspicions. "Professor, don't you think Quirrell is very strange? I always feel he's, like Fooley, brewing up some big story," she finished. "It's Professor Quirrell. Ada, he'll be your Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher next year," Dumbledore corrected gently. "Still, Quirinus's behavior is odd, so it's natural you would be suspicious." "Am I being too suspicious? Is he really just eccentric?" Ada's thoughts wavered. After Fooley and Cecil, she was filled with distrust and a little prejudice against anyone in the Defense Against the Dark Arts post. Those predecessors had dug deep pits and left her worse off for it. Dumbledore ruffled her hair the way a kindly elder might. "On the contrary, there is nothing wrong with your suspicion. I thought so too." "When did you notice something was wrong? How did you find out? Have you made any plans?" Ada asked, eager for details. "And you should call him Professor Quirrell," Dumbledore reminded her again with a smile. "I can't claim to understand every student, but clever ones like him leave a strong impression. His oddness didn't escape me." "You look like someone who likes giving second chances," Ada said, puzzled. If she had Dumbledore's reach and power, she thought, she would be more decisive. Dumbledore looked up at the night sky. "That's another story, a long one. I'll tell you when I have the chance." He added playfully, "I did not use legilimency, by the way." "So what will you do about Professor Quirrell?" Ada pressed. "I've made preparations. It will be a delicate plan." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. "Actually, I would prefer Quirinus to come to me of his own accord. It would save a great deal of trouble, and I could try to help him." "Enjoy the rest of your holiday," he said, and with that he apparated away, leaving Ada staring at the night sky, wishing for more. She wondered whether his long story concerned Voldemort or Grindelwald. The lights at the burrow were still on. Percy was chasing the twins in the sitting room because Fred and George were teasing him with his prefect badge. Ron and Ginny clapped and laughed, while Mr. Weasley looked on fondly. Mrs. Weasley stood in the doorway, softly calling Ada's name. A gentle breeze stroked the garden. The evening felt full of tenderness. On Wednesday morning, Mrs. Weasley woke everyone early. Today they were going to Diagon Alley for school supplies. Mr. Weasley had sorted everything out somehow. Everything ran like clockwork. They took turns through the fireplace. There was still plenty of Floo powder in the flower pot, but Mrs. Weasley and Ada planned to buy more since they used the Floo network most often. They thought they had left early, but Diagon Alley was already crowded. Wizards and witches of all ages bustled along the cobbles. Mr. Weasley took Percy to Elop's Owl Emporium. Percy would be rewarded for earning his prefect badge, while Mrs. Weasley took the twins and Ron to buy robes. Ada took little Ginny to the second-hand bookshop. Ada crouched, sorting through piles of used books, while Ginny read the supply list aloud. She was a regular at the shop, though the owner never gave her discounts. The first book Ada picked up was Quentin Trimble's The Dark Forces, a guide to self-protection, what Ron needed. Other first-year texts like Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, and A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration could be supplied by Ron's older brothers, but Defense Against the Dark Arts books were harder to come by. Every year brought a new professor who chose different texts. Ada began picking books for the twins from another pile. She'd already bought her own long ago. Working at the Leaky Cauldron let her save a little. After a while, Mrs. Weasley arrived with Fred, George, and Ron. Mrs. Weasley and Ron went into the shop, but the twins stayed in the doorway, waving at Ada to come out. Ada handed Ginny the books she had chosen and stepped out. She brushed the dust from her hands. "Why don't you come in? At least pick your books." "Father took Percy to Elop's," Fred said in mock solemnity. "He might buy Percy a new owl, or even a new robe," George added, grinning. Ada nodded. "So what are you getting at? All of Ron's things are hand-me-downs," Fred sighed. "Robes Bill wore, old books we used." George's gaze stayed on Ron inside the shop. "He might even have to use an old wand. You should have seen Charlie's old wand." Ada reached over and tapped both their foreheads. Were they ill today, to fuss so about their brother? The twins swatted her hands away and said together, "We're fine, just a bit uncomfortable in our hearts." First-year expenses were always the worst, and with Percy becoming a prefect this year, the household had extra strain. The Weasleys weren't rich, and the bills for new robes, books, and supplies added up. Ron was neither the eldest nor the youngest. He wasn't the most outstanding either, so he tended to get overlooked. He would likely be handed old things again this year. "What do you two want to buy him? A new robe or a new wand?" Ada asked Ron. "I suggest a wand. Using an old one could hold him back." Fred and George brightened and nodded vigorously. Ada had read their minds. Fred's worried face made him sound sincere. "But there's a problem," he said. "We have no money." "It's not that we have no money," George amended, putting on a pained expression and pinching his thumb and forefinger close together. "We're just a little short." 144. Sell you to Nocturne Alley. Problems that can be solved with money aren't problems. The real problem is not having any. The twins had made a little cash selling maps at the start of term, but their research had cost them too, and so far there'd been no return. They weren't rich, and they couldn't afford much. They wanted to buy a wand for their younger brother, but didn't have the funds, so naturally they thought of the little rich girl, Trist. This was something they could only discuss with her. "The two of us can scrape together 6 galleons, but that won't buy a wand from Ollivander," Fred said, holding 4 galleons in his hand, while George emptied a handful of sickles and nuts. "So you want me to chip in?" Trist asked, looking at them. "Don't chip in. Lend it to us," George said. "You know how hard you earn every nut." They all knew Trist earned her money the hard way. Snape paid her, and his sharp tongue was well known. It was unlikely his payments came easily. Trist had not spent the summer resting. She'd worked at the Leaky Cauldron every day and studied late into the night, repeating that exhausting routine. Fred and George felt bad for her. "If it weren't for lack of money, you wouldn't have wanted to tell me about buying Ron a wand?" Trist asked, looping her left arm around Fred and her right around George. The twins, a little taller than she was, bent down so she wouldn't have to stand on tiptoe to reach their shoulders. They hadn't planned to tell her. They wanted to buy the wand first and then surprise Ron. But pockets can be cleaned out no matter how tightly you plan, and theirs were emptier than their faces. "Now you two go get Ron, and we'll go to Ollivander's and choose him a wand," Trist said. "As for your money, put it away for now. Boys your age shouldn't have empty pockets." "But—" "No buts. Do as I say. I'm your sister, a few months older than you." "Do you want me to write to Charlie?" Trist threatened. She was no longer counting every nut. She could be generous, and besides, Ron wasn't a stranger. She wanted to help Mrs. Weasley. The twins went into the bookshop, whispered a few words to Mrs. Weasley, and then let a baffled Ron out. He kept asking, "Where are we going? If we're getting ice cream, why didn't we call Ginny?" Last year, Trist had taken everyone to Florian Fortescue's for ice cream, so Ron assumed that was the destination. Fred put a hand on Ron's shoulder and said solemnly, "Ron, you know our family is very poor. Everything you have is hand-me-downs, and you eat way too much." "Mom and Dad can't afford you anymore," George said, covering his face as if to hide tears. "Later we'll take you down to Nocturne Alley and sell you to the old witch there. Then you won't go hungry." Ron didn't really believe them, but he was still a little frightened. His freckled face paled. "Trist, that's not true, right?" he asked. Trist couldn't help laughing at his worry. "Of course not. Though you do eat a lot. How could your mother do such a thing? George, help me. My stomach hurts from laughing." So the silly red-headed Ron followed his 2 scheming brothers out of the shop. Trist led the way, with Fred and George on either side of Ron, making it look for all the world like they were escorting him to Nocturne Alley for a deal. They pushed through the crowd and even past Mr. Weasley and Percy, who had just come out of Elop's Owl Emporium. Ron was about to call to his father when Fred and George swiftly covered his mouth. If he'd been wearing a black hood, it would have made the joke even more convincing. 2 years later, or rather, 2 years hence in memory, they arrived at the old Ollivander's wand shop. Ron only then understood what the 3 of them had been up to. His face went as red as his hair. Trist pushed open the door and led them inside. The shop still had other customers, so they sat on a bench and waited. The little boy in the shop was making a mess trying out wands, clattering things about. Ron's thank you to Trist was almost drowned by the noise. Trist ruffled his hair. Thank Fred and George. They were the ones who suggested it. Ron looked at his brothers in surprise, half unbelieving. Fred and George looked back with mock menace in their eyes. Keep staring, and we'll really sell you to Nocturne Alley. The noisy little boy and his parents eventually left, and Trist took Ron to the counter. Ah, Miss Trist, the last time I saw you seems only yesterday, Ollivander said, extending a hand. How does your wand suit you? Trist took out her wand and laid it in his palms. It's perfect, she said, like an arm. Thank you for your skill. You, phoenix feather, 13 3/4 inches, Ollivander murmured as he examined it. A fine piece of workmanship. He whispered, orchid bloom, and a small spray of orchids unfurled at the tip of the wand. You've taken excellent care of it. It's fond of you. It's resisting my spell casting. A wand is an extension of a witch or wizard, the conduit for magic and their first protection. Trist cared for hers accordingly. Once a wand is lost, many wizards are little better than muggles. Sir Patrick Delaney Podmore, nearly headless Nick, had been beheaded 45 times, but one can imagine how helpless a wizard would be without a wand. Taking her wand back, Trist presented Ron. My brother Ron Weasley is going to Hogwarts and needs a wand. I'll leave him in your hands. Ollivander regarded Ron with his pale, watchful eyes. Of course, Miss Trist, it's my honor. Which hand do you favor, Mr. Weasley? Right, Ron said stiffly. Then came the familiar ritual, the measuring tape, Ollivander's practiced speech about how wands choose their owners. Seriously, didn't Ollivander ever change his spiel? He said the same things to every customer. Ron tried wand after wand, applewood, beech, alder, knocking things over as he went. It wasn't until he tried a willow wand that Ollivander stopped him. Willow, unicorn tail hair core, 14 inches, Ollivander announced. This one has chosen you, Mr. Weasley. The willow wand was slender and elegant, well suited to Ron's taller, lankier frame. Ollivander launched into his characteristic discourse. The ideal owner for a willow often has insecurities. It chooses those with great potential and a long road ahead. A willow will help speed them on their way. Trist and the twins sat quietly while Ron listened with rapt attention, practically swelling with pride at the idea of being chosen. Ollivander's words worked like a tonic. After them, you felt destined for greatness. He finished, smiled, and added, 10 galleons, please. Ron came back down to earth, blushing and more than a little flustered, wondering if it had all been another of Fred and George's jokes. It wasn't. The twins truly wanted to buy him a wand, and Trist was paying. She took out her small leather pouch, counted it out, and lined 10 galleons one by one along the counter. 145. Dog takes mouse. Whether it was in Ollivander's wand shop or walking along the slightly crowded Diagon Alley, Ron still couldn't quite believe he actually had a new wand. He even pinched himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. Carefully slipping the wand back into its box, he also tucked away the small wand care kit Ollivander had given him as a courtesy. His cheeks were flushed with excitement. They were always a little red, in fact. So much so that Trist half joked he looked drunk. The four of them made their way down the cobblestone street toward the second-hand bookstore. They were planning to meet Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, and halfway there they ran right into them. Mrs. Weasley called out, waving at Ron, who was trailing behind the twins. Where did you four run off to? I've been looking for you for ages. Come here, Ron. Let's go find your father. Why, Mum? Isn't Dad off buying a present for Percy? Ron asked, puzzled. No, we're going to Ollivander's to get you a wand, Mrs. Weasley said matter-of-factly. Your father and I thought it would be better if you had a new wand. As soon as she'd said it, she noticed the group ahead of her seemed a little odd. What's wrong with you lot? She asked. Mom, we just came back from Ollivander's. Trist gave me a wand as a present. Ron's voice trailed off. He realized his mother's attention wasn't on him. Before he could finish, Trist stepped forward. This is a birthday gift from Fred, George, and me to Ron. A boy only turns 11 once, she said briskly. We also wanted to congratulate Ron on starting school, Mum, so don't worry about it, George added. Fred shot Trist a glance and tossed in another supportive comment. Mrs. Weasley sighed, a little helpless and very touched. She walked up to Trist, hugged her, and whispered, Thank you, my dear. Mrs. Weasley knew the twins' pocket money came from their parents. She could guess if they were flush or not. Trist had said it was a present to save everyone the awkwardness of being refused and to spare Fred and George any embarrassment. She understood, and that was why she hugged Trist right there in the street. "Mother, if you keep hugging like that, when will we find Dad and Prefect Percy?" Fred complained, nudging her gently. "And if you hug any harder, Miss Trist might be strangled to death." George added, half teasing. Mrs. Weasley wiped away a tear and let Trist go. Trist sniffed and said brightly, "Now let's go find Dad and Percy, then on to Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions." "Why Madame Malkin's?" Fred asked, confused, then looked at Trist. "Are you buying more clothes, Trist?" "Women always like to dress up," George observed. Mrs. Weasley answered, "Since Ron doesn't need a wand now, we can buy him a new school robe. He can alternate it with Bill's old one. Oh, and we can get one for Percy, too." "Why?" the twins protested in unison. "Ron is one thing, but why should Percy get one, too?" "Because Percy is a prefect," Mrs. Weasley said. "If you two were prefects, I'd buy you robes as well." Fred and George exchanged a look of dawning horror. "We did the right thing, but somehow I feel we've done something wrong," George muttered. "Don't say it," Fred groaned. "That's exactly what I'm thinking. If we hadn't spoken up, Percy wouldn't have had new robes." They were the picture of mixed pride and regret. Trist strolled over and, hands clasped behind her back, poked at the wound. "So which of you two will be a prefect in 5th year? One of you? Both of you?" "Never," the twins said at once and with unshakable conviction. "We'll never be prefects in this life or the next." Ding! Long-term quest has been released. If the host successfully becomes a prefect in 5th year, the quest is completed. If the host successfully becomes head girl in 6th or 7th year, it is considered an over-completion of the quest. Trist had been smugly watching a rival house's hopes collapse and was enjoying it when the joke turned on her. Choosing Trist to be a Gryffindor prefect would be such an outrageous move that Professor McGonagall would have given up competing for the House Cup entirely. A prefect leading the charge in point deductions would be a fearful sight indeed. McGonagall's blood pressure alone would be a concern. It was calming, in a way, that such fantasies were only fantasies. They pushed through the crowd and found Mr. Weasley and Percy. Mrs. and Mr. Weasley explained about Ron's new wand and the plan to buy robes for Ron and Percy. Arthur Weasley didn't loudly reprimand anyone. Instead, he gave Trist a small, approving pat on the shoulder twice. Arthur was a man and a father. He often expressed what he felt through actions rather than words. Time slid by quickly, as it always does when you're having fun. The summer of 1991 passed in games of chess and cards. After 2 months of matches, Trist finally beat Ron the Great Demon King at Wizard's Chess. The victory wasn't entirely honorable, a gambit and a lucky blunder on Ron's part, but a win is a win, and she savored it. Trist wasn't naturally as gifted at chess as Ron. She knew her limits. Still, she wouldn't swap minds with him. Sometimes Ron's head was just not in the right place. That summer, Ron didn't put down his new willow wand. Seeing this, Fred and George generously taught him a spell of their own invention, a nonsense little charm they swore could change the color of Scabbers, Percy's old rat, now Ron's. The incantation went like this, as they taught it with all seriousness. Daisies, sweet cream, and sunshine turn this silly fat rat yellow. It contradicted every bit of magic Trist had ever heard about. Even without formal study, the phrase didn't sound like a spell at all. But Ron believed in it and tried it in secret, several times. Each attempt failed in the expected way. It was not a spell, and it never worked. One would have needed a miracle for it to alter Scabbers' fur. Since Percy had passed Scabbers on to Ron, the rat's daily torment shifted hands. If Ron wasn't careful, Galleon, Trist's beige Labrador, would chase Scabbers relentlessly. Galleon seemed to relish his dominance over the little rat. Whenever he saw Scabbers, he would pounce and nip as if trying to catch him for good. When Percy still owned the rat, he would ask Trist to control her dog, and Trist would pretend to scold Galleon a few times. The dog would behave for a few days. Now that Ron was Scabbers' keeper, the rat's life had become increasingly grim. Ron dared not come to Trist to complain, and he couldn't take on Galleon, so he took Scabbers with him everywhere. If he ever forgot the rat once, Scabbers could only pray for mercy. That holiday had been both painful and happy for Ron. For Scabbers, it had been nearly unbearable. Happy times are always short. In the blink of an eye, it was September 1st. Hogwarts was about to reopen, and Ron and Harry Potter were going back to school. The days of hardship and homework were beginning again. On the morning of September 1st, Mrs. Weasley arrived at King's Cross Station with a swarm of children in tow. Mr. Weasley was conspicuously absent. Poor Mr. Weasley was working overtime again this weekend, just as he had last year. As head of the Ministry of Magic's Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, he had few reliable subordinates and was constantly left to deal with the smallest, most tedious tasks himself. Esmeralda suspected his rapidly receding hairline had something to do with the hours he kept. Unlike many ministry officials who sat in their offices doing little, Mr. Weasley did everything himself. Still, despite the overtime and the worry, promotion had never come, and the pay was hardly generous. King's Cross was as crowded as ever, and the platforms were especially packed. Mrs. Weasley kept a tight grip on Ginny and was forever trying to rein in the twins, whose energy was steadily wearing on her patience. "Fred, George, if you two run about again, your father will take you home, and you won't be allowed to mention Quidditch for a month," Mrs. Weasley snapped. "Is Mum going through menopause?" George muttered under his breath. "Esmeralda, you're a woman. What do you think?" Fred taunted, always eager to push boundaries. Esmeralda turned and gave them both a look that said she wouldn't stoop to their level. She didn't know whether Mrs. Weasley was going through menopause, but if the twins dared to say it again, she would remind them that adolescence was no joke either. She had a hunch why Mrs. Weasley had been more short-tempered lately. One of the family was missing. Charlie was in Romania, and Esmeralda suspected his absence made Mrs. Weasley miss him. A group of oddly dressed people, odd in the eyes of muggles, with owls perched on trolleys gathered by the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Just by walking through that wall, one would find the Hogwarts Express waiting on the other side. "Esmeralda! Esmeralda!" someone called from the platform, the name slipping out strangely familiar. Few people ever called her Esmeralda. Friends like the twins and Angelina used it, acquaintances used her surname, Trist, and the polite ones added Miss. Many at Hogwarts simply assumed her name was Esmeralda Trist. Esmeralda turned and saw a skinny boy in clothes far too big for him, waving awkwardly. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, grinned at her. After a few whispered words to the twins, Esmeralda left the group and walked over. "Didn't Hagrid tell you where the platform is?" she asked. "Hagrid gave me a ticket, but I couldn't find the platform," Harry said, excited and a little embarrassed. "I even asked a guard." Esmeralda imagined the look the Muggle guard had given him. "Come with me. I'll introduce you to everyone." She led Harry back to the Weasley cluster. The twins peered with curiosity. They had no idea when Esmeralda had met this boy. Esmeralda presented him. "Mrs. Weasley, this is Harry, Harry Potter." The reactions were varied. Mrs. Weasley brightened, though she tried to hide it. Percy looked pleased in the way only a prefect-to-be could be. The twins wanted to know how Esmeralda had met him, and Ginny, who usually referred to him as Harry this and Harry that, went completely crimson and ducked behind her mother. It was the sort of starstruck reaction Muggle girls showed when they saw someone they admired. Esmeralda went on quickly. "This is Mrs. Weasley. The one who doesn't smile much is Percy. These two look exactly alike, Fred and George. Don't bother trying to tell them apart. Sometimes even I can't." She pointed to Ron. "Ron, he's starting Hogwarts this year like you. The one hiding behind Mrs. Weasley is Ginny. She's the youngest, and your little fan." "A little what?" Harry asked, puzzled. Mrs. Weasley, keen to keep things ordinary, stepped in gently. "Are you looking for the platform? It's just like when Esmeralda found it 2 years ago." The twins remembered that day. They had been the ones to notice Esmeralda lost at the station back then, and were still astonished that the girl they'd casually helped had become so important in their lives. "Percy, you go first," Mrs. Weasley said. Percy, already ready, pushed his trolley toward the barrier and vanished the moment it touched the wall. "Fred, George, Fred, you go next." Mrs. Weasley hesitated, never sure which twin she was pointing at. They'd fooled her with their swapping more than once. "Madam, you got it right this time. I'm Fred," Fred said, striding forward with George at his heels. Their trolleys were full of everything a witch or wizard could need, and as always, they had a little more than their own things, including some of Esmeralda's luggage, a practice that had started the year before. Esmeralda stood with empty hands in front of Harry. "See you at Hogwarts, Harry Potter," she said. Harry watched them disappear through the wall and felt the pull of magic stronger than ever. Hogwarts sounded like everything Hagrid and Esmeralda had promised. "Don't worry," Mrs. Weasley called after them. "You just walk straight at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Don't stop, and don't be scared. Run through it if you have to. Go on, you go first. Ron will follow." Once through, Esmeralda saw the gleaming scarlet engine again, the din of the crowd and the clatter of trunks. Fred and George were waiting by their compartment. "When did you meet Harry Potter?" Fred asked. "It sounds odd," George said, remembering the autograph they'd brought back months ago. "You brought back his autograph before. How did that happen?" "We met by chance in May, at the orphanage near where he lives," Esmeralda said, pulling out her wand. "I wouldn't say we did more than that. We only know each other's names." The twins refused to believe it was that simple. Esmeralda, already moving, used a simple levitation charm to float their three sets of luggage into the compartment, ignoring the looks from muggles and anyone who thought magic was too much trouble. Why strain when a spell would do the work? A boy with wild dreadlocks, Lee Jordan, walked over carrying a cardboard box. He tipped it up to reveal a long, furry leg. "Esmeralda, how is it? Cute, isn't it?" "Lee Jordan, do you want to be turned into something cute?" Esmeralda shot back. "No girl would like that thing, me included." The twins, of course, found the spider fascinating. They just helped Harry move his trunk earlier and now clustered around Lee, chattering about how strange girls were for not liking such adorable creatures. Esmeralda, who wasn't afraid of spiders but simply disliked the way they crawled, was tempted to hex each of them. Lee, clutching his box, went off to find Angelina and Alicia, hoping Angelina would keep her hands off his spider. Esmeralda and the twins returned to Mrs. Weasley to say their goodbyes. Naturally, the twins took the chance to needle Percy about his prefect status. He had boasted about it all summer, and they'd been mockingly jealous ever since he got his new robes. Mrs. Weasley admonished them all, and, as often happened, her scolding accidentally planted a fresh idea in the twins' heads. Filch's days in the castle were, Esmeralda thought, about to become considerably less peaceful. The whistle blew. The students boarded the train, and the platform began to thin, parents standing together until the Hogwarts Express pulled away. Esmeralda teased Ron, who still hadn't found a seat. "Ron, do you want to come to our compartment? I'll introduce you to some pretty older sisters." "And a bag spider you'll absolutely love," Fred added. "Want to see it?" At the mention of a spider, Ron shook his head so vigorously his freckled face flapped. He would rather chance his luck in other carriages. "Fred, George, we're in the middle compartment," Esmeralda told him. "If anything happens, you can find us there. Have a good journey, Ron." With that, the train steamed onwards, and the children were on their way to a new school year. 147. The first sight of Potter was a mistake for life. In the middle carriage of the Hogwarts Express, Lee Jordan sat slumped in the corner of the compartment, while Angelina and Alicia chattered away opposite him, paying him no mind. He stared blankly, crestfallen, barely reacting when the twins burst in and opened the door. Ada greeted Angelina and Alicia with a warm hello and exchanged a few quiet words. Predictably, Lee, still dazed, produced his bag of spiders to impress Angelina. The result was obvious. Neither the spiders nor their owner won any favors. If they had been puppies or kittens, Lee might have had a shot. Girls who like spiders are rare, unless that spider was named Peter Parker. The five in the compartment started swapping holiday anecdotes. Lee hadn't quite recovered yet. Harry Potter came up in conversation, but no one suggested visiting him. Harry was a person, not some exhibit. Outside the window, the countryside blurred past, and Lee's spirits began to lift. Just as he was about to rejoin the talk, a soft knock sounded, and a round-faced kid walked in, sniffing. "Excuse me," he said, eyes wet and voice trembling. "Has anyone seen my toad?" Nobody had. Ada recognized the boy immediately, Neville Longbottom, the same boy they'd met at St. Mungo's. Neville, however, didn't seem to remember Ada. "I've lost him again. He always tries to run away from me. he wailed, slipping back out of the compartment and shutting the door behind him. Alicia, who was already wearing a slightly maternal expression, murmured, "Boys shouldn't cry like that," but he looked so miserable. Angelina, puzzled, asked, "Do all you boys like such strange pets? Lee's spiders, Neville's toad, even boys who liked insects. These were mysteries to girls, the way girls linking arms to go to the loo was a mystery to boys." Ada didn't care whether the animals were strange. She cared whether they were useful or amusing. Food and beauty, she thought, were human nature. The group debated the differences between the sexes without ever reaching a conclusion. Physical and psychological differences were one thing, but it was easier to find common ground and respect the rest. Another knock came, and Neville returned, this time with a girl. Thick brown hair, prominent front teeth, robes askew, Hermione Granger. Her tone was brisk and a little officious. "Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one," she said. "No," Ada replied bluntly, "but there's a bag of spiders if that helps." She didn't like Hermione's manner. If Hermione had been softer, Ada might have offered to help Nell out of respect for Professor McGonagall, but an arrogant tone grated on her. Ada had a low tolerance for people who acted superior without cause. "I'm going for a walk," Ada announced, standing up. "I'm tired of sitting. I'll check on Ron while I'm at it." The twins followed her out. They strolled down the corridor, expecting nothing more than a bit of fresh air. And then they found trouble. A pale, blonde boy was leaning at an open compartment door, flanked by two hulking cronies who looked as if brains had lagged behind their growth spurts. "You think my name's funny?" the pale boy sneered. "No need to ask who you are. My father told me all Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford." Before he could go on, someone patted his shoulder. "Want to play with the big boys?" Fred said with a smile that had no warmth in it. The twins had meant only to watch, but now they were drawn in. Ron had apparently ribbed Malfoy earlier. Ada, who'd been watching from the side, caught sight of the insult and rushed in to smooth things over. "If my brother was rude, I apologize on his behalf," Ada said politely. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Malfoy, but since you insulted the Weasleys, perhaps you should apologize to them now." Draco Malfoy bristled instead of apologizing. "Are you trying to pick a fight?" he snapped. Crabbe and Goyle cracked their knuckles loudly to show how intimidating they were. What do kids rely on when they pick a fight? Size and how hard they can hit. The twins didn't look the least bit intimidated. In fact, they wanted to laugh. They'd spent enough time with Ada to have learned a few tricks of their own. Ada had only meant to give them a little demonstration. With a casual wave, not even drawing her wand, she released a small flick of magic. The two hulks were sent sprawling like they'd been smacked. Mere inches of control, nothing more. Ada's wandless magic had improved over the summer. Harry, who had been standing nearby, watched in astonishment. He'd been wondering what to do if a fight broke out, join the twins or help Ada and Ron. He had no idea someone could end a skirmish with a single wave. Malfoy was utterly stunned. Crabbe and Goyle were flat on the floor. He opened his mouth to protest, but Fred and George had already closed ranks, each looping an arm around Malfoy's shoulders as if to protect him. "Do you want to apologize yourself, or shall we help you?" George asked. "Do you know who my father is?" Malfoy yelled, panicked. "He won't let you get away with this." "No idea," Fred said cheerfully, "but it's certainly not either of us, or you'd be a Weasley. I advise you to apologize sincerely." "Do you know who my father is?" Malfoy repeated, voice high and frantic. Ada disliked the proud but useless "my daddy" routine. Instead of getting angry, she smiled. "Mr. Malfoy, we really don't know who your esteemed father is. Perhaps you should ask your esteemed mother. You might be pleasantly surprised." That hit. Draco went even paler. He knew the trio across from him didn't respect his family name, and Crabbe and Goyle hadn't yet gotten up, but humiliation in front of so many students was a blow to the Malfoy legacy. Before he could figure out what to do, a big voice called out, "What are you doing? Let him go." A burly boy pushed through the crowd and shoved the twins aside without looking. "Draco, are you all right? Don't worry, I'll sort it out for you," he said in a voice that, oddly, didn't match his build. "Long time no see, Marcus," Ada drawled, clearly entertained. School hadn't started yet. There was time for a little mischief. The newcomer was Marcus Flint. In his eagerness to curry favor with Malfoy, he had inadvertently offended Ada and the twins. He hadn't forgotten how that had gone for him before. He'd learned some hard lessons. Fred casually sat on Crabbe. George did the same to Goyle. As the two tried to struggle free, the twins pinioned them effortlessly. "Marcus, we've missed you very much," the twins said, grinning. 148. Don't fight with Ada. The air in the compartment grew thick with tension. When Marcus Flint arrived, Malfoy straightened and felt a surge of confidence. Flint was far more formidable than Crabbe or Goyle, and he hadn't come alone. The crowd swelled, delighted by the prospect of a spectacle. Gryffindor versus Slytherin, a head-on clash. What could be better? Everyone wanted to see if Esmeralda Twister was as fearsome as the younger students whispered. Hearing about her was one thing. Seeing her in action was another. Many still didn't understand what had happened to Crabbe and Goyle. How had they just gone down? The students' murmurs reached Malfoy, and the confidence he'd just regained began to fade. From the talk he learned, the blonde girl opposite him was Twister, and that insulting her had been a grave mistake. Malfoy felt aggrieved. He'd only meant to meet Harry Potter, not pick a fight. He'd come with good intentions. Who would have guessed it would end like this? He certainly hadn't expected Twister to defend the unremarkable Weasley. Esmeralda pulled her wand from her pocket. She felt it proper to show some respect to Flint, a repeat student, and not face him empty-handed. Ron worried she was inviting trouble and tugged her sleeve. Esmeralda gave him and Harry a calm, reassuring look. When she produced her wand, Flint's pupils tightened and his bravado drained away. He held back the eager Slytherins behind him and said in a low, pleading voice, "Miss Twister, Draco and I are family friends. Give me 3 minutes to sort this out." Why ask for 3 minutes? Esmeralda thought, but she nodded and put her wand away. There would be no fight. She flicked a hand toward the snacks on the seat, and 3 chocolate frogs flew into her palm. She tossed one to each of the twins and kept one herself. No one had seen precisely how she'd felled Crabbe and Goyle, but everyone did see her summon chocolate frogs without a wand this time. "Wandless magic!" cried the few students who understood what they'd witnessed, and that shouted observation spread like wildfire. As the story traveled, the truth warped. Esmeralda went from being able to perform wandless magic to being able to knock down a strong man with her bare hands. Rumor had a tendency to make things far more terrifying than they were. Flint leaned in and murmured to Malfoy. He had worked out what had happened in mere seconds. He wanted to ask the obvious. Why had Malfoy bothered to meet Harry Potter at all? Had he forgotten what their families did? And if he had come to meet Harry, why had he offended this Twister girl? Flint still bore a grudge from the lesson Esmeralda had given him last year and had written home seeking revenge. His family's reply had none of the support he expected. Instead, they told him to bear it, warning him not to escalate things. "Miss Twister, can't we just let this go? It's only a squabble between children," Flint tried again. He knew he had to protect Draco. Malfoy family favor mattered to the Flints. "I'm only asking for an apology. Is I'm sorry so hard to say?" Esmeralda asked. Flint hesitated and began, "Draco's father." Mentioning parents and influence set Esmeralda's teeth on edge. She slid her hand back into her pocket and smiled pleasantly. "Is Mr. Malfoy's father Lord Voldemort?" she asked. The 3 words fell like a knife. Around them, breath stopped. Things clattered as students froze. Flint, Malfoy, and the Slytherins behind them paled. The fear inspired by Voldemort's name was ingrained in every wizard's memory. Not just fear of his magic, but fear of the name itself, even though Voldemort had been defeated by Harry Potter. "No," Flint stammered. "Since he's not," Esmeralda said, "what reason does he have not to apologize? Is Malfoy's face important, and my Twister's worth nothing?" Her hand remained in her pocket, and the smile never left her face. Flint remembered that same smile from when Esmeralda had handled him the year before, and worried she might draw her wand and strike Draco. He was right to worry. Her hand was on her wand, but what he hadn't guessed was that the spell she'd used on him last year had evolved into something called the Lightning 5-Strike Whip. More powerful, with no extra cost, terribly efficient. Cornered, Flint could only manage, "I'm sorry. I apologize to Mr. Weasley on behalf of Draco." He wanted to spare Draco trouble and avoid getting beaten himself, so he muttered the apology and hoped to leave the rest for another day. He was wiser now. Esmeralda had already lowered herself enough. The apology would be accepted. Pressing further in front of so many people would make her look unreasonable. With that, Flint shepherded Malfoy away. Malfoy did not glare at Esmeralda as he left. He turned his scowl on Harry instead. A spiteful look, perhaps, or simply the work of fate. Once the possibility of a fight was diffused, the crowd dispersed, but there was plenty for them to talk about. Esmeralda's wandless magic alone would be the subject of gossip for days. Only Esmeralda, the twins, Ron, Harry, and the brown-haired girl who'd earlier spoken sharply remained by the compartment. The girls seemed worried about Harry and Ron, more about Harry than Ron. Esmeralda glanced at Ron and thought, "Little brother, your starting line in life is nowhere near Harry's." She had wanted to scold Ron for mockery of someone's name. It was rude, but she felt she wasn't in a position to lecture. She wasn't a saint herself. So she said little and left the compartment with the twins. After seeing Esmeralda and the twins off, and then Hermione, Harry closed the compartment door and turned to Ron, who was slumped in his seat. "Ron, are your family and Esmeralda very close?" he asked. "Esmeralda's Fred and George's classmate," Ron said, straightening. "Mum and Dad adore her. She's practically another daughter to them. Last year they invited her to live with us, and that'll keep happening. Ginny and I see her like an older sister. My wand was a gift from her." "Are there many people who can do what she just did?" Harry pressed. He'd seen a different side of the world for the first time and wanted to learn more. "Probably not," Ron admitted. "Mum and Dad can't do it. Bill and Charlie can't either. Esmeralda's a genius. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall at school both like her a lot." Esmeralda was the first person to show Harry that magic was more complicated than he'd imagined, and he couldn't help being curious and a little envious of her power. The Hogwarts Express carried them north as night fell. In past years, disembarking had been a crush, but this year things were different. Students kept their distance from Esmeralda as if she gave off an unpleasant smell. Her display of wandless magic had spread train-wide. Everyone was afraid of offending her. If you couldn't afford the risk of provoking her, it was safest to avoid her altogether. Thanks to that caution, Esmeralda and the other 5 stepped off the train easily, unharmed by the usual jostling. On the platform Hagrid stood, a familiar bulk calling out, "First years, gather here!" A knot of little ones clustered round him, Harry and Ron among them. Seeing the small newcomers made Esmeralda ask, "Fred, George, have you told Ron what the sorting ceremony's like?" "Of course not," Fred said. "We made it sound terrifying. Ron probably thinks he'll have to fight some beast." "When we started, Charlie and Percy didn't tell us either," George added. "Why should we tell Ron?" Keeping the sorting ceremony a secret was a long family tradition, part of the fun, part of the initiation. The 6 hungry friends squeezed into the same carriage. The door shut, the thestrals set off, and the castle awaited. The welcoming feast in the great hall, and a new term, waited for them all. 149 hardcore Hannah thestral-drawn carriages passed through a pair of magnificent wrought-iron gates, flanked by stone pillars topped with winged boars. Inside the gates, the carriages picked up speed along the long, uphill drive to the castle. Its turrets and towers grew nearer to Esmeralda and her companions. The carriage eased to a stop beside the stone steps. Esmeralda pushed the door open and was the first to leap out. The straw in the carriage had been acceptable, but the musty smell was truly unpleasant. Esmeralda and her group climbed the stone steps with the crowd, passed through the majestic oak doors, and mounted the grand marble staircase before they turned into the great hall. Under the enchanted ceiling, countless candles floated in midair. Students from all 4 houses buzzed, mostly about 2 subjects. One was the renewed clash between Gryffindor and Slytherin. Esmeralda was still at the center of it all, now notorious as the Esmeralda who could crush a strong man with her bare hands. The other topic was Harry Potter, who was enrolling today. Everyone was dying to know which house the chosen one would be sorted into, and they hoped it would be theirs. Esmeralda and her friends had debated it on the carriage. None of them thought Slytherin had a chance. Its reputation was ruined in their eyes. How could Harry Potter, the boy who had defeated Voldemort, possibly be sent to a house full of dark wizards? Ravenclaw seemed a bit less likely, only because its standards felt impossibly high. If you didn't meet them, you couldn't become a Ravenclaw. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff were both possible, though a few leaned toward Gryffindor simply because Dumbledore, the headmaster, was a Gryffindor. Their chatter halted when Professor McGonagall came up behind Esmeralda. "Esmeralda, well done. You're really getting promising, bullying first years in the carriage," she said. Did the news travel that fast? It had reached McGonagall already. Did Snape know too? Esmeralda felt a little wronged. There had been Flint and several older students. If anyone had bullied, it was more likely they had bullied her. "Professor, I can explain," she began. McGonagall cut her off. "I'm about to fetch the first years. I don't have time for excuses. The incident happened on the train, so I won't deduct house points," she said. "But you won't escape punishment entirely. Wednesday evening at 7. My office. Don't be late." McGonagall left. Esmeralda noted she didn't look angry so much as resigned, as if passing a sentence rather than seething. She turned to glance at the staff table and saw Snape watching her. Snape's expression was impossible to read, so layered and odd that Esmeralda felt certain she was doomed for potions that year. If that look didn't mean trouble, she thought wryly, she would change her last name to Trist. "You think you're the fastest student to ever get detention?" Fred grinned, delighted. "No one'll beat this record," George added, patting Esmeralda's shoulder as if she'd broken some world record. "Is this history-making?" Esmeralda asked herself aloud. "When Hogwarts a history gets revised, you'll be in it," Fred said deadpan. Before the 1991 start-of-term feast even begins, Esmeralda Twister has detention from the deputy headmistress. Soon the students at the tables placed their pointed black hats on their heads. At that moment, the Great Hall doors opened, and everyone fell silent. Professor McGonagall led a long line of first years into the hall. They stood at the front as all the tables and staff watched. Esmeralda kept stealing looks at Snape. His expression had become even more complex. McGonagall set a four-legged stool down and placed the battered sorting hat on it. The hat twitched, its brim opening into a slit, and it began its traditional song. Esmeralda barely heard the words. She kept watching Snape. He was the picture of self-control in public, so to see so much in his face felt like watching nested dolls. Esmeralda watching Snape, Snape watching Harry, and Harry watching the Gryffindor table. Who Snape was looking at, or why, remained a mystery. When the song finished, the hall applauded. McGonagall stepped forward, unfurled a parchment, and announced, "When I call your name, put on the hat, sit on the stool, and await your sorting." "Hannah Abbott," she called first. A rosy-cheeked girl with two golden braids stepped forward. The sorting hat shouted, "Hufflepuff." Then Susan Bones went to Hufflepuff, Terry Boot to Ravenclaw. This year, everyone watched the ceremony more closely than usual. Harry hadn't appeared yet, and anticipation built. Fred and George booed every time any house but Gryffindor was favored. When Lavender Brown was sorted into Gryffindor, their cheers were loudest of all. "Hermione Granger!" McGonagall called. The brown-haired girl from the train hurried to the stool and put the hat on. The sorting hat hesitated longer than usual and then decided on Gryffindor. Neville Longbottom posed the hat's next dilemma. The hat took even more time before finally naming Gryffindor for the nervous, round-faced boy. Parvati Patil, a very beautiful girl of Indian descent, was placed in Gryffindor too. The hall's excitement rose with each name. Everyone waited breathlessly for the name they'd come to see. "Harry Potter!" A buzz ran through the hall. The boy the wizarding world had watched for 10 years finally stepped forward. As soon as the hat was placed on his head, silence fell, so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Professors leaned forward. Flitwick muttered. Sprout folded her hands and prayed to Merlin. McGonagall watched with a small, tight smile, and Snape stared with that indecipherable expression that seemed to hold anticipation, disgust, nostalgia, and pain all at once. The sorting hat deliberated and then shouted, "Gryffindor!" The hall erupted. Gryffindor climbed higher in cheers and clapping than any other house had managed, banging on tables, stomping feet, roaring. They had the boy who lived. Fred and George shouted at the top of their lungs, "We've got Potter! We've got Potter!" Esmeralda clapped along, peeking at the four heads of house. McGonagall's smile was small but unmistakably pleased. Flitwick and Sprout applauded sincerely, though with some disappointment. Only Snape's clapping was perfunctory, his gaze still following Harry. The rest of the first years were sorted. Lisa Turpin to Ravenclaw, Ron Weasley, pale and nervous, into Gryffindor like his older brothers, and Blaise Zabini into Slytherin. When the ceremony ended, Gryffindor had not only the boy who lived, but a near-complete set of Weasleys. Just Ginny was missing. Thanks to readers Memory, Shio Sinsoyuan Uputeng, and Loi Ruteng for their donations. 150. Visions of the future. Ron, who had been sorted into Gryffindor, walked to the house table and sat down beside Harry. The two had struck up a friendship on the train. Everyone chatted quietly with their neighbors, and the first years blended in. Gryffindor, like Hufflepuff, was uncommonly welcoming. Albus Dumbledore stood and gave his customary opening speech. Welcome, everyone, to Hogwarts for a new school year. Before the feast begins, I would like to say a few words, and here they are: nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak. When he sat down, the famous Harry Potter, speaking for the new students, whispered, "Is he a bit mad?" The older students nearby hurried to reassure them, praising Dumbledore's brilliance and eccentricity. They could tell the younger ones that Dumbledore was wonderful, but they did not really understand him. His remark was beyond explanation. A confused Angelina asked, "Ida, what do you think the headmaster meant by that?" Ida, who was good at reading between the lines and liked to pull meaning out of a single word, thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe he's referring to the 4 houses." "How does that fit?" Fred scoffed. "You're overthinking it." "Maybe it's like this," Ida said, hesitating. "Everyone except Ravenclaw is a nitwit. Everyone except Gryffindor is a blubber. Everyone except Slytherin is an oddment. And everyone except Hufflepuff is a tweak." She smiled. He could be making a joke about the houses. Her friends considered the idea, and despite the insult hiding in the logic, admired the cleverness. "Dumbledore is certainly a comedian," Fred said. "So funny nobody can quite get him," George added. Of course, Ada wasn't Dumbledore. This was only her interpretation. How many points it was worth depended on who was listening. 1,000 people could hold 1,000 Hamlets. Plates on the table were already piled high with food, and Ron, his appetite wide open, proved himself Hogwarts' #1 eater. Ida, who liked to think she could outdo anyone in a fight, had to concede the culinary crown. She tried to preserve her dignity by eating quickly but with posture. Ron had no such restraint. He held a chicken leg in each hand, moving them so fast his knife and fork left after images, and could swallow a pie in a single bite. Ida admitted defeat with good humor. The Gryffindor first years began to introduce themselves and their backgrounds. Sir Patrick Delaney Podmore gave his customary demonstration of what it was like to be nearly headless, successfully frightening many of the newcomers. Ida found this year's cohort entertaining. Harry, the quiet boy whose fame preceded him, the insatiably studious Hermione Granger, the tearful Neville Longbottom, and the comical Samus Finnegan. Ida wondered if this year might finally break Slytherin's monopoly on the House Cup. After everyone had eaten their fill, Dumbledore rose again to give a few warnings. No one was allowed into the Forbidden Forest. He shot a glance at Ida and the Weasley twins as he said it. No magic in the corridors. This time, his look rested on Ida alone. "Finally," he said, lowering his voice for dramatic effect, "I must tell everyone that anyone who does not wish to suffer a terrible, painful death should not enter the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor." The twins' eyes lit up. They'd found their mission for the term. Fred nudged Ida. "When shall we go see it?" he whispered. "Dumbledore saying that is basically an invitation," George agreed. "Pick a time, Ida." Ida smiled at their impatience, but she was practical. "Let's wait a week or 2, she said. "Professors are strict at the start of term. Let's keep our heads down for a bit." The twins happily agreed. They were all curious, of course. If Dumbledore hadn't mentioned that corridor, hardly anyone would have thought to investigate it. The warning worked like a danger, deep water sign at a lake. Some people would heed it and some would not. Dumbledore had only said the corridor was dangerous. Like the Forbidden Forest, he hadn't offered any explanation, and that only made people more curious. Ida was sure they wouldn't be the only ones tempted. After a sumptuous feast and a raucous, tuneless chorus of the school song, the opening banquet ended. The first years followed Prefect Percy through the noisy crowd and out of the Great Hall. Older students, like Ida, left as soon as they could. Ida and the twins headed for Gryffindor Tower and began talking shop, their map business. They had sold a batch the previous year and done well, even with imitators cropping up. But this year, the market had new challenges. Last year's buyers were novices who needed help finding their way around the castle. After a year at Hogwarts, those students knew their way and their old maps gathered dust, or were handed down to new students, which ate into Ida and the twins' sales. Ida was scrupulous about the maps. She wouldn't tamper with them. The spells were meant to prevent copying because she believed in product integrity. Still, she had a plan. This year's model would be entirely new and better than last year's VIP edition. The big addition was Filch. As caretaker, Mr. Filch was a relentless nuisance, a man students loved to hate because he caught miscreants and gloated. Ida's new map could track Filch's movements and give advance warnings. Students who'd endured his wrath would snap such a map up. Even well-behaved students would buy one for peace of mind. She could even offer a custom couples version. Add a student's or professor's name, and the map would show where that person went. It was a little shady and could ruin flimsy relationships, so it would be priced higher. Ada's modification of the Marauder-style map had become a lucrative sideline. She planned annual upgrades, different versions, and price points, so by the time they graduated, they'd be ready to launch Map V6, which she dreamed would be perfect. With that capital, she and the twins could open a joke shop, a real enterprise in the magical world. Starting funds could come from Professor McGonagall, she joked to herself, or perhaps they could squeeze a little coin out of Dumbledore. If they could keep the business running through the first hectic months and stitch together funds from various sources, Ida was confident they'd make it. The future, she thought, looked very bright. 151. After clearing the fog, the future becomes even more confusing. On Monday, September 2nd, Ada sat in the Great Hall eating breakfast while the twins filled her in on last night's map sales. The upgraded maps had sold well, but the cheaper, second-hand maps that older students resold were undercutting them. Some students with limited pocket money opted for the cheaper option. The same thing had happened in the girls' dormitory under Ada's charge. It was inevitable. She used second-hand books herself. She couldn't try to bully everyone into buying only from her. That would be too heavy-handed and would lose popular support, making her venture even harder. After a while, Ron and Harry came over, each carrying a map. Ron looked sulky. He didn't even glance at the twins. "Ada," he complained angrily, "Fred and George sold me a map last night. The price was fine at first, but when I asked if there was some sibling discount, they jacked the price up, 1 galleon for a single map." When it came to squeezing their younger brother, the twins were masters. Their rate of ripping Ron off always outpaced his ability to crawl back out of their traps. Just when he thought he'd escaped one, another snare was waiting. "But you bought it at the original price in the end, didn't you?" Fred said. "Business is business and personal is personal. Don't mix them." "We give you pocket money and presents," George added with mock patience. "But business is business. If we started making exceptions, everyone would expect favors." If Ron had been a few years older and less fresh to Hogwarts, George wouldn't have bothered with the long explanation. He'd have let Ron learn the hard way. Ron mulled it over and had to admit the twins had a point, but he was still peeved. His brothers had embarrassed him before his new roommates the night before. "Want to know how to shock your roommates?" Ada asked, setting down her vegetable soup. "Want to make an impression they'll never forget?" Ron's face lit up. He nodded eagerly. He wanted to stand out. Even Fred, George, and Harry leaned in. "Tonight, after you get back, prepare a long, sturdy rope," Ada said, picking her bowl up again. "And then," Fred snatched the bowl from her. "And then," he urged, "hang yourself from the dormitory door in the middle of the night," Ada finished, deadpan. "When your roommates wake up, it'll traumatize them for the rest of the year." Professor McGonagall, who was handing out timetables nearby, happened to overhear the last part. She looked over calmly and said, "Ada, if you hang yourself off the dormitory door tonight, you won't need to see me on Wednesday." Ada blinked. McGonagall's tone had that familiar no-nonsense edge one only heard from the stern Transfiguration professor. Also, McGonagall added, if I find out you've been in the corridor on the right side of the fourth floor, don't be surprised if you find yourself dangling at the entrance of the Gryffindor common room. The smile was all steel. Ada took the timetable with both hands and promised, quickly and sincerely, that she wouldn't go anywhere near that corridor, would obey the rules this year, and wouldn't do anything to jeopardize the House Cup. Only then did McGonagall let her go. Ada glanced at her timetable and then promptly forgot the warning in the rush of scheduling. She had a lot of classes this year: charms and defense against the dark arts on Monday, with divination in the afternoon, herbology, care of magical creatures, and history of magic on Tuesday, transfiguration and charms on Wednesday, defense against the dark arts and ancient runes on Thursday, and transfiguration and potions on Friday. Friday was, once again, a black day. The two strictest professors were scheduled then, which meant misfortunes never came alone. Charms in the morning was as dependable as ever. Professor Flitwick led everyone in a review of last year's work before beginning the new material, steady and competent. The contrast with Quirrell in defense against the dark arts that afternoon could not have been starker. Quirrell's class suffered from his stammer and from the fact that he often struggled to cast spells properly. Any disruption in the classroom made him jump, and his frail, feeble manner made one fear he might be frightened to death by his own shadow. The twins, always ruthless, had already set up a betting pool among the first years on how long Dumbledore would put up with Quirrell. The most popular bet was 1 month. It wasn't a question of whether Quirrell would be defeated by some dark force, they joked. It was whether the headmaster's patience would last that long. Ada found herself reassessing her earlier impressions. Could Quirrell be dangerous? He seemed incapable of even matching a first year. He had the air of someone far past his prime. If it was all an act, perhaps he was playing harmless on purpose to keep Dumbledore from noticing. If so, his acting had improved over the summer. By the time the nerve-wracking Defense Against the Dark Arts class ended, Ada missed Glover Cecil. Though the man was a cheat, at least he taught real skills. He was far more useful than the incompetent Quirrell. After class, the twins and Ada hurried straight to the North Tower for divination, which was taught at the very top. Climbing the long spiral stair made many students regret their elective choice before the lesson even began. Paintings chattered in their ears as they climbed. By the time Ada reached the top, her least favorite professor had already taken her place, Professor Trelawney. The divination classroom looked nothing like a conventional lecture hall. It resembled an old tea room, with 20 small round tables scattered about and a row of wall alcoves, each holding a crystal ball that gleamed like a hanging lamp. Someone had even stuck up a mock advertisement over the doorway. Hogwarts rooftop divination, spectacular views. Madame Trelawney offers readings by appointment, which made the room look even more like a parlor than a classroom. There's a smell in here, Fred murmured. Funny. Ada sniffed. Sherry, and some other alcohol. I don't know about the rest. Students whispered and exchanged skeptical looks. Rumor had painted Trelawney as a dreamy, theatrical figure who coasted through the term, an impression many students thought would make divination a joke. Then a soft, theatrical voice floated from the dim corner. Welcome, it said. It is truly wonderful to see you all in the material world. Professor Trelawney emerged into the firelight, draped in beads and chains, a profusion of bangles and rings clinking on her arms and fingers. With her many glass ornaments, she looked every bit the eccentric seer. The students sat on cushions or low chairs. The twins, Harry and Ada, chose a table together. They shared looks of barely concealed disappointment. Trelawney's manner seemed as unreliable as Quirrell's. She spoke at length about her inner eye and her extraordinary gifts, praising herself in a way that dampened rather than kindled enthusiasm. Many had chosen divination because of the textbook's title, Unfogging the Future. They wanted to learn useful ways to find clues about what lay ahead, not to listen to theatrical pronouncements. Trelawney told them how she planned to run the class and offered a few minor predictions, then reached what apparently always counted as the high point of her opening, a grave, dark prophecy. In May, she intoned, one of us will depart from this world forever. Before taking the class, curious students had asked around and heard that Trelawney liked to announce a student's death at the start of the year. It was practically a signature move. Hearing it out loud snapped a few dozing students to attention. Who would be the one? The gesture was pure showmanship, and the crowd response was predictable. The old con artist trick: frighten someone with doom and then milk them for their belief. It was what street fortune tellers did: start with disaster to make you believe they could see danger, then charge for reassurance. Such theatrics might sometimes catch the truly gifted, but most of the time, they were just that, an act. Ada found the whole episode worrying. If the staff at Hogwarts included people who drifted from genuine skill to theatrical madness, what did that say about the school's future? The weight of responsibility she fancied for the future headship of Hogwarts suddenly felt heavier than a funeral. She had already begun, in her mind, to roster which teachers would need attention once she had any power to change things. 152. No one can resist such a cutie. Ida was still thinking about how to sort out the staff. People like Quirrell, incompetent and always causing trouble, definitely couldn't stay. Trelawney, who dragged down academic standards and made recruitment for the subject difficult, also needed to be considered. More worrying were the teachers whose judgments were so biased they could never be role models for students. Such skewed hearts had no place in the faculty. After startling the class and demonstrating her talent, Trelawney finally began the divination lesson. She instructed everyone to pair up, drink their tea down to the leaves, and then read the patterns left behind. Fred and George filled 3 teacups and set them back on the table. The tea was scalding, but Trelawney urged the students to hurry. The twins downed their cups in a few gulps, burned their tongues, and stuck them out in comic agony. Ada took her time. Blowing gently, she didn't want blisters. Fred and George swirled their cups, drained them, and exchanged them. "What do you see in your cup?" Ida asked, curious, though she too was swirling lazily like a customer at a tea room rather than a student. "Besides a pile of soggy leaves, I don't see a thing," Fred grumbled, peering until his face nearly smudged against the porcelain. "Who invented this? It's useless." George was equally dissatisfied, trying to make out shapes that kept shifting: a puppy, then a hat, and feeling dizzy from it. Ida tasted her tea, swirled the cup, and shook her head with a smile. "I think my prophetic eye's been covered. I can't see the future at all." The 3 put down their cups and burst into laughter. They'd lost interest. Trelawney drifted among the students, encouraging them to broaden their minds, in other words, to use their imaginations and be good storytellers. In her view, if you could coax death or misfortune out of a teacup, you were a qualified diviner. When Trelawney, in her usual slurred tones, declared the lesson over, the students hurried out. By the time the class ended, half the students had been told they would meet with misfortune, and the other half lived in fear that someday they would. No one left feeling reassured. Outside the North Tower, Ida and the others appeared in the Great Hall for lunch. She ladled stew onto her plate, as if misery could be turned into appetite. All the Gryffindor third years who had taken divination felt the same. Their first afternoon back had been rough. One timorous, stuttering professor and an eccentric, neurotic one. To have 2 such hidden dragons and crouching phoenixes in a single afternoon felt tragic, and now they would have to endure a whole year of it. When she chose divination as an elective, Ida had fancied herself someday becoming a prophet, able to avert disasters, foresee strategy, and win battles from afar. Reality had brought her back down fast. To train into a true seer would take decades, if not longer. Divination was the least rigorous of the magic subjects. Its textbooks were little more than collections of past diviners' musings with limited practical value. As Trelawney herself liked to say, books can only teach you so much. Unlike other subjects, poring over texts wasn't a shortcut. It only helped you understand others' prophecies a bit faster. Without a natural gift, without a renowned mentor, Ida knew she couldn't excel in divination the way she did elsewhere. But with effort, she could pass. Talent, she realized, mattered. On Tuesday afternoon, after lunch, the students went out in the warm weather toward their first Care of Magical Creatures lesson. The grass underfoot was springy as they followed the slope down to an open space near the edge of the forbidden forest. Professor Wilhelmina Grubbly Plank was waiting there, an older witch with cropped gray hair and a fondness for smoking that reminded Ida of Glover Cecil. The class would normally have been taught by Professor Kettleburn, 62 times placed on probation but beloved for his roguish charm, but Kettleburn was unwell, and someone had to fill in. Rumor said Hagrid had offered, but Dumbledore chose Grubbly Plank. That was probably for the best. Facing Hagrid's huge favorites on your first lesson would have been unforgettable for different reasons. "Come along now, our first class is about to begin," Grubbly Plank called, standing on a patch of freshly turned earth. "I see some of you are nervous. Don't worry, the creatures for today are very gentle. I promise you'll like them." She opened a large box beside her and pulled out a small cage. Inside was a black-furred animal with a long snout, part mole, part miniature platypus. "Does anyone know what this little cutie is?" Grubbly Plank asked. "Say it out loud. We're outside, not in a classroom." Ada didn't want to be outdone. She answered loudly and clearly, "A niffler, an excavating creature from Britain. They love anything shiny, gold, jewels. They usually live in burrows about 20 inches underground, and a litter can have 6 to 8 young." Fred and George were whispering behind her. "Don't you think Ada would be perfect to raise a niffler?" Fred murmured. "Perfect. She'd feed and fuss over it and probably adore it," George replied. "Very good. Gryffindor gains 2 points." They snickered. Grubbly Plank held the niffler up for everyone to see. "Goblins often use these little fellows to dig for treasure," she explained. "Though nifflers are gentle by nature, they're so destructive that they're not really suitable as pets." After more explanation, the students lined up in pairs, and each was given a niffler to encourage to dig for treasure in the cleared ground. Ada found her niffler affectionate and surprisingly tame compared to other creatures. If only this little cutie would keep its paws out of her pockets, she thought greedily. She could see the advantages. Watching the animal burrow in and out, sniffing for anything shiny, Ida let herself imagine raising a few as pets. Forget the exotic Zulu for now. Who could resist a creature like this? Short on funds? Take a niffler out to forage. With a tiny treasure-hunting sidekick, who would need to run a joke shop? At the end of the lesson, she reluctantly handed her niffler back and asked Grubbly Plank about prices. Even walking back toward the castle, Ida kept glancing over her shoulder, eyes fixed longingly on the box where the nifflers were kept. She had planned to study bowtruckles or fire crabs for her first Care of Magical Creatures class, but nifflers had been utterly irresistible. 153. Discussion of Transfiguration. Apart from the unpleasantness of defense against the dark arts and divination, Ada had enjoyed a leisurely first 3 days of term. She and the Weasley twins even found time to visit the corridor off the right side of the 4th floor. The passage was usually deserted, but after Dumbledore declared it a restricted area, it had become oddly popular. Crowds gathered at a distance, peering in, but never venturing inside. Nobody wanted to risk their life out of mere curiosity. Fred and George planned to scout it again at night to see whether they could get farther in. Ada didn't go with them because she had an appointment with Professor McGonagall. She had received the summons before the start of term feast. At 7 o'clock, Ada arrived punctually at McGonagall's office. There would be no essay to mark tonight. Instead, Professor McGonagall intended to test Ada to see what level her transfiguration had reached. On the 2nd floor office couch, Ada began to transfigure objects at McGonagall's requests. She started with inanimate things, simpler transformations, then moved on to living creatures. With each demonstration, the professor gauged Ada's skill. Given another 2 or 3 years of steady growth, McGonagall told her Ada could easily qualify to teach Transfiguration. Transfiguration, defense against the dark arts, and charms were Ada's strongest subjects and the focus of her daily practice, so McGonagall's praise did not surprise her. But as Ada's understanding deepened, a practical question had begun to nag at her. Beyond conjuring a helpful animal or two, could Transfiguration be used directly against another person, on an enemy or on oneself? "Professor," Ada asked, unable to hide her concern, "if someone transfigured a person into a pile of bones or some inanimate object and didn't reverse it, Would that count as murder? McGonagall's face tightened. When did you get such a dangerous thought? She asked, worried. She could see how the memory of Mrs. Mary's death and that battle still weighed on Ada. Ada hadn't been thinking about actually committing such an act, only the theoretical possibilities. I thought of it a long time ago, she admitted. I worry someone might transfigure me into an animal. McGonagall explained the two ways transfiguration could involve people. Someone can transfigure you, in which case you become wholly an animal and lose your magic and human way of thinking. The other way is the animagus form, where a witch or wizard willingly becomes an animal and keeps their magic and their mind. That difference is why trailing an animagus is so difficult. Very few can do it. She glanced at Ada with a hint of dry amusement. In the 20th century, there were only 7 registered animagi. One of them is in this office, me. And I still remember you feeding me dried fish once, quite recklessly. Transfiguration can, in theory, turn people into animals or objects like chairs and tables, McGonagall continued. But very few possess the skill. And transfiguration is, in principle, reversible. If a counterspell is cast in time, the person is not endangered. That is precisely why the killing curse is so feared. It has no counterspell. There are many ways transfiguration can be integrated into combat, she added, but it is mostly used to assist, much like what you have done before. Wizards are not defenseless animals. It's exceptionally difficult to apply transfiguration directly to a rival. You'd need far greater magic than your opponent and a profound theoretical grasp of transfiguration. Relieved, Ada patted her chest. The idea of being turned into a small animal or a piece of furniture had long haunted her, especially after reading an essay titled On Whether the Vanishing Spell Can Be Applied to the Human Body. The Vanishing Spell, covered in 5th-year transfiguration and the most difficult charm on the OBUL exam, can make living or inanimate things disappear. Ada had practiced it and could make small animals vanish. Theoretically, she knew it might be possible to use it on a person. Successful application would look very much like murder. McGonagall's eyes narrowed playfully. So you get frightened too. Next time you make me angry, I'll transfigure you, she said with mock severity, as if weighing which animal Ada deserved. Professor, the school rules forbid transfiguration on students, Ada protested. She knew the rules well enough to look for loopholes. That may be the rule, McGonagall said, raising her teacup and letting the faint steam cloud her expression. But which house are you in? Gryffindor, Ada answered. Professor Flitwick complained about it. And who is your head of house? McGonagall asked. Do I need to answer? Everyone knows Gryffindor's head, Ada began and then understood. Discussing school rules with McGonagall was like discussing them with any old Gryffindor. Rules were meant to be sensible, not unbending. McGonagall had often used the threat of transfiguration to frighten misbehaving students, but she rarely used it as a real punishment. She would be even less likely to use it on someone like Ada. After a smile and a joke, the professor steered the conversation back. Transfiguration is, because of its complex theory and legal constraints, the most difficult branch of magic. That's why we teach it from the simple to the profound. She reminded Ada how the first transfiguration class had used matches as practice. Later they moved to insects and mice, and eventually to larger animals. Ada asked the question she'd been turning over in her head. What about transfiguring yourself? Not the animagus kind, but modifications useful in combat. McGonagall paused, considering. Transfiguration cannot create magical animals, so it won't directly increase your combat power. In special circumstances, however, partial transfiguration can be useful. For example, if you needed to dive into the Black Lake, you might temporarily turn your feet into webbing. She looked serious. There are methods in the magical world that attempt to increase power through transfiguration, but those stray close to the dark arts. They're dangerous and reckless. They both glanced at the clock. It's getting late, McGonagall said. Transfiguration is not a topic you can cover in one evening. By the way, she added, how is divination? Awful. So awful I can't describe it, Ada said self-mockingly. In Professor Trelawney's words, my inner eye is blurry and obscured. I mean no disrespect, but Sybil is not fit to teach. I've always thought that subject was a poor choice. Ada's voice darkened. Choosing divination was probably my biggest mistake this year. Can I drop it? McGonagall opened a drawer and took out a roll of parchment. Of course you can. Electives can be changed. And here. She handed Ada the parchment. The handwriting was a slender, looping script Ada didn't recognize. It wasn't McGonagall's. What is this? A withdrawal form? Ada took it with both hands. Professor Dumbledore asked me to give it to you, McGonagall said. He knows you're practicing silent casting. These are some of his insights and experiences on silent spells. They should help you. Ada accepted the parchment gratefully. Thanks to my book friend, Purple Ice Quiet Bamboo, for the reward. Chapter 154. Why did you name the chapter in the first place? It's better to arrive at the right time than early. Just as Ida was about to doze off, Dumbledore placed a pillow under her head. At the end of last semester, she decided she wanted to practice silent spellcasting, and Dumbledore had sent the notebook right at the beginning of this term. Perfect timing. Silent spellcasting, as the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 6 put it, is casting without speaking the incantation aloud. Your opponent can't tell what you're about to cast, and that momentary uncertainty can be a decisive advantage. That's why Ida wanted to learn it. Silent spells are fiendishly difficult. They demand iron will and absolute concentration, and they typically weaken the spell's effectiveness to varying degrees. Even so, Ida thought it worthwhile. For sneak attacks and ambushes, weakened magic that is unpredictable is better than loud, overpowered magic that alerts your target. If you wanted to be a true Lord Voldemort of stealth, silent spells were the way to go. After she got the notebook, she couldn't linger in Dumbledore's office. Professor McGonagall promptly sent her back to the common room. It was late. McGonagall told her to go to bed and not to wander the castle, especially not the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor. In the common room, the twins were waiting. Fred and George had done a bit of reconnaissance and reported their findings. The corridor on the right side of the 4th floor was nothing but dust, cobwebs, and one locked door. The lock was the ordinary kind, decorative rather than security. Nothing about the area felt forbidden. In the wizarding world, ordinary locks were often just for show, and this one was the sort anyone would use to make a door look proper. Dumbledore's simple "do not enter" sign wasn't going to stop students who were curious. The so-called forbidden corridor felt almost unguarded, as if someone had put a handkerchief on the banister and called, "Come and play." Ada was convinced there had to be something important behind that door. Why else would Dumbledore be so openly vague about danger inside the castle? You can't expect people to sleep peacefully when a perilous room stands a few doors away. They discussed it in whispers and decided to investigate next week. Thursday brought Quirrell's Defense Against the Dark Arts again. 4 days into the term, and students of all years were already feeling the strain. After another hour of his class, Gryffindor's third years found their last shred of hope in Quirrell completely gone. Quirrell wasn't nervous. He wasn't even trying and failing. He simply seemed inept. There was no sparkle, no method to the madness. He was just bad at teaching. The class had become a mutual torment. Quirrell's incompetence turned instruction into spoon-feeding, and the students were tormented merely by having to show up on time. If Quirrell's teaching level was any indication, anyone could hold a post at Hogwarts. Ada even felt she could do it. After all, how much worse could she be than Quirrell? That afternoon she had ancient runes. She'd expected Professor Bathsheba Babbling to be elderly. Instead, the professor turned out to be surprisingly young, only in her 20s or 30s. Ancient runes is mostly theoretical, deciphering and studying old runic manuscripts, rather like muggles studying ancient scripts. Ada mistrusted a young expert at first. After all, Quirrell had taught her caution about judging by age. Professor Babbling quickly proved Ida wrong. Despite her youth, she had real depth. She had published papers on runes and accomplished more than many older scholars. She'd come to teach to further her research. Her syllabus was sensible. She started by explaining what runes are and why the course mattered, then introduced a few of the simplest characters, like teaching children to recognize picture words. The class was mostly Ravenclaws. The 3 other houses, combined, didn't outnumber them. Ida spotted Cedric Diggory from Hufflepuff in the room as well. After one lesson, everyone had a solid grasp of what ancient runes covered. and Professor Babbling's abilities won them over. If you had to find a flaw, it was that she was an unstoppable chatterbox. Maybe she'd been alone with runes for too long. The student's presence seemed to bring her back to life, and she poured words out like they'd been trapped inside her for years. She talked relentlessly about runes, about ancient and powerful magics, about family gossip, about which newspapers were worth reading, and even about the state of school lunches. She complained that ancient runes should be compulsory and demanded education reform from the ministry. She even said Dumbledore's salary was too low to allow her to buy new clothes. Cedric leaned over to Ada and muttered, "She hides in her office translating runes all day. Why does she need so many new clothes?" Ada ignored the aside. What interested her more was something Professor Babbling said about Quirrell. She didn't admire the stammering, broken Quirrell who stood before the staff table now. She spoke of the Quirrell from last semester, sharp, quick-witted, and clearly talented. She regretted how much he'd changed. "Except for his face," she said, "everything about him seems different." Mention of Quirrell set some students to turning indifferently back to their notes. You have others to fantasizing about some romantic backstory between the two professors, and a few to speculating about what on earth had happened to him. For Ida, cause and effect mattered. Only by knowing what changed Quirrell could she guess what he might be planning. If his secret was dangerous, she needed to prepare. If it wasn't, she could sit back and enjoy the show with a small stool. 155. Abandoned Ida. Let's not talk about what's in the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor. Let's not talk about whether Professor Burbage and Quirrell were childhood sweethearts. And let's certainly not talk about the secret Quirrell keeps or what he intends to do. For now, Esmeralda had neither the headspace nor the appetite for speculation. She was about to face a disaster she couldn't ward off. Only a few days had passed since she'd slapped a Slytherin on the train, and Esmeralda didn't expect Severus Snape to let her off lightly. His recent absence from troublemaking felt more like temporary restraint, a snake coiling itself before a strike. That strike would come, she was sure of it. Patience calmed her only for a moment. The more she thought of it, the angrier she grew. Snape must be furious. Hadn't Harry Potter himself already endured one of the professor's savage lectures? Even Hermione Granger, the bright, eager know-it-all, had been dubbed the second-generation Miss Know-it-all. As the perpetrator of the train incident, Esmeralda, who had been labeled the first-generation Miss Know-it-all, imagined her fate could only be worse. It wasn't that Esmeralda was timid. Snape simply was not someone to provoke. He had endless opportunities to dock points from Gryffindor, and she didn't want to give him any extra reasons. Points were not a trivial thing to her. If Gryffindor lost them, Snape would be gratified and Professor McGonagall would be furious. Esmeralda would never deliberately do anything that would bring pain to loved ones and joy to enemies. Besides, Snape's attention toward her was not pure malice. There was a kind of care in it. If that care had not existed, she would have clashed with him long ago and sent Gryffindor's score plummeting. So she studied up, cramming all the potion formulas, ingredients, and practical knowledge she could think of. If she could answer his questioning, she reasoned, she could survive the class. She'd faced his venom before. It hadn't broken her defense. Getting through this potions lesson unscathed would be a victory, keeping Snape's anger tamped down and avoiding point deductions. Yet, she arrived in the dungeon classroom with a heavy heart and a stomach that hardly wanted lunch. The jars and bottles on the shelves looked more sinister in the dim light, but third years were used to that now. The absence of Snape these last few days had given them a chance to gossip about that morning's chaos. The first years had had their joint potion class with Slytherin, and most expected Snape to go easy on Harry Potter. Instead, he escalated things, and with Neville Longbottom's disastrous showing, the whole session had been a fiasco. Harry had quickly become Snape's new object of scorn, after Esmeralda no less, and he'd already been the first of the new Hogwarts intake to suffer point deductions from that particular professor. When the bell rang, Snape kicked the door open and stalked to the podium. His black robes cut a familiar silhouette across the classroom as his gaze swept the students. The silence pleased him. Still this classroom, Still these faces, he said, drawing his cloak about his shoulders. I hope what little you have learned has not been entirely driven from your troll-like brains. Naturally, I do not expect much. After all, a certain famous person apparently can't be bothered to even preview his work, so I won't expect you to review. No one needed to ask who he meant. There was only one famous freshman who regularly made Snape's blood boil. Then Snape's eyes rested on Esmeralda. Fame is no guarantee of substance, he said. Beneath a glittering surface, there may be nothing but an empty shell. Would you not agree, Trist? Esmeralda braced herself. Here it came. You are right, Professor, she said tightly. Very good. It seems not all your brain cells have been scrambled, he replied. Open your books. If your minds are as muddled as some, perhaps today's potion will remedy that. She had expected a dressing down, but instead Snape launched straight into the lesson. No probing interrogation, no lingering sneers directed at her, just another class. Esmeralda's relief was immediate and intense. The board announced the day's potion, the confusing concoction. So it was not the brain-awakening potion today, she realized. Snape was playing men against men in his own way. Negative times, negative equals positive. Fires were lit, cauldrons set up, and the constant hiss of flames made the dungeon feel like a grim cooking class. The ingredients beside her snapped her back to attention: scurvy grass, lovage, and sneezewort. The confusing concoction made its drinkers irritable and reckless, prone to act with their bodies rather than their heads, in other words, to be more Gryffindor than Gryffindor. Esmeralda chopped, bruised, and strained the herbs, measuring juices and discarding residue. When the heat hit the right tone, she added the components to her cauldron in sequence, keeping her eye on the simmer and on the color changes Snape had described. Snape swept through the room as usual, black robes and harsher words, leaving little marks of his passage. Everything looked the same as any previous lesson, but then everything felt different. Students suddenly noticed something missing. Snape hadn't troubled Esmeralda. He didn't approach her table, didn't single out her potion for scorn as he usually did. It was as if she gave off a smell he avoided. The twins noticed it too. They had been braced for the worst, ready to watch her take the hit, but Snape's ire had a new aim. What's wrong with Snape today? Fred muttered, puzzled. Did he take the wrong potion? How come I feel like Esmeralda's been abandoned? George added as he stirred. Harry's the new favorite, and our Esmeralda's been dumped by the old bat. If you can't speak properly, don't speak, Fred scolded. Not dumped, disliked. They joked last year about the new replacing the old, but the previous crop of freshmen had failed to win Snape's notice. They'd resigned themselves to Esmeralda remaining the focus of his wrath for another year, until Harry arrived and in a single lesson stole Snape's attention. In doing so, he had inadvertently rescued Esmeralda from another round of torment. Esmeralda forced herself to finish the potion, following instructions to the letter. There was something small and hard-won in being ignored by Snape today, relief tempered by the knowledge that his silence was only temporary. Hogwarts shifted and rearranged its balances of power in small, strange ways, and for the moment, one less enemy's eyes were on her. Thanks to Harry for stepping up and doing the right thing, it hadn't been for nothing that Ada had taken him home when he was soaked through. Good deeds really do bring rewards in this world. This was Ada's third year at Hogwarts, and for the first time, potions had felt easy. There was no Snape's verbal abuse, no one ordering her around, and no one vanishing her potion with a hex. Ada finally felt the simple joy of brewing. Not for an assignment or for galleons, but for the pleasure of watching the potion in her cauldron take shape, the sense that her effort was paying off. Snape continued the class without bothering her. It seemed that after that question, Ada had become a wisp of air, completely out of his notice. Her potion finished. Though its purpose was to make people irritable and reckless, its color was pale and its scent pleasant. Poisonous plants often lure with fragrance rather than repel. Ada poured the confusing concoction into a glass bottle, stuck on her own label, and placed it in the box on the podium where finished work waited for Snape's grading. The box was rarely full. Snape usually cleared out most students' efforts as trash. Only truly finished products were preserved. Even during that routine, Snape paid her no special attention. After class, he marked her potion with an O. Previously, no matter how well she brewed, the best she ever got was an E. An outstanding mark had been unthinkable. Maybe it really was a new generation replacing the old. Harry Potter carried more weight than Esmeralda Twister. It was harder to annoy the savior than a plain Muggle-born student. Ada was delighted and simple enough to think her troubles were over. She didn't dig into the deeper meaning of Snape's indifference. She didn't realize her new status was precarious, that she might become like Ron in the Weasley family, loved but always a little sidelined. On the weekend, she took Dumbledore's notes to Twilight Cottage and began practicing wandless spells in private. She worked on simple things, Lumos, which she'd always been good at, and the levitation charm from first year. She still reveled in the extra time to herself, unaware that those glittering little golden opportunities might slip away. If Snape kept ignoring her, private tutoring would vanish. Without that, how would she earn any galleons from potions? Ada hadn't thought that far ahead. She concentrated on silent casting and could already make the sofa float. The little dog galleon at her feet blinked with wide eyes as the furniture rose. Just then the twins pushed open the door and collapsed onto the newly landed sofa, unusually worried faces replacing their usual grins. Oh, what happened? Did Oliver throw another fit? Or did he make the team do more drills? Ada settled back in her rocking chair. Galleon bounded onto the twins' laps. The three of them had come to Twilight Cottage together that morning, but the brothers had ducked into a meeting mid-morning, a Quidditch team meeting to sort out this year's squad. Charlie Weasley had been Gryffindor's captain. When he left, Oliver Wood took over. Oliver wasn't like Charlie. He'd always been strict with himself and others and had a famous temper. He'd been Charlie's second for 2 years and still blew up at practice. Oliver threw a tantrum again, and this was the worst one yet, Fred said. Wasn't it just a meeting? What were they even talking about? George moved Galleon off him. Tryouts aren't until next week, but Oliver's been prepping since the first day of term. The results aren't looking good. Charlie had left a decent lineup behind. The beaters were Fred and George. The keeper was still Wood. The chasers were Angelina and Alicia, and Katie Bell could fill in this year. Offense and defense were strong. It was almost a luxury for a school team. The problem was Charlie's vacancy at Seeker. You haven't found a Seeker? Ada asked, pouring 3 cups of tea and adding cream to the twins' cups before handing them over. Yes, Fred sighed. The same people try out every year. Everyone already knows who's actually good. The twins fretted about the team's future, but only in Ada's presence did they show it so plainly. We can't count on first years, and the school hasn't let a first year onto the team in ages. Even when Katie did so well last year, Professor McGonagall wouldn't allow it, George added. Everyone's racking their brains over the Seeker position. Ada hadn't been at school for the final Quidditch match last year, so she hadn't seen how Gryffindor narrowly missed the championship, just a bit of luck away. If Charlie had stayed, they'd probably have won. But Charlie had gone off to Romania to raise dragons, and losing an excellent Seeker left the team in trouble. Without a replacement, Gryffindor seemed out of the running. Ada didn't enjoy the thought either. She wasn't obsessed with Quidditch, but no one wanted their team to lose. Fred suddenly brightened. How's your practice going? Not bad, Ada said warily. Why would he ask that? She knew he wasn't seriously suggesting she try out. Thanks to the system and the twins' help, her broom work had improved fast, but she still wasn't ready for top-level competition, and she didn't even own a broom. She was reluctant to empty her small vault to buy one. Brooms weren't cheap, and if she wasn't actually going to play, what would be the point? You don't seriously want me to sign up, do you? Are you both mad? Ada said, staring at their eager faces. It's better than those duds trying out. The one's not even worth a sniff, Fred said. We'll take a chance. It's a long shot, but worth a try. You've seen the tryouts before, haven't you? You know what they're like, George pressed. You can do it. You're capable. Ada didn't see herself agreeing. If it were just for fun, she might, but actually playing in a match? She'd be flattened by someone like Cedric and lose all credibility. Seeing her stubborn refusal, Fred switched tactics. Have you forgotten your reputation? Once you're on the pitch, who would dare try to grab the snitch from you? George was already picturing it. The score close, the golden snitch speeding by, Ada on the field with a battered broom following it slowly, while the opposing seeker held back, wary of making a move, until Ada snatched the snitch and won the match. Especially against Slytherin, let's see who dares to play dirty then. With your wandless magic, you'll send them tumbling off their brooms one by one, he said, eyes shining. Like that thing you mentioned? The enforcer from ice hockey, Ada supplied. Exactly, the enforcer, Fred said, grinning. Your main job is deterrence. Catching the snitches just a side order. Ice hockey was the most brutal of sports in her past life. Fighting was part of the game. One-on-one scuffles were routine, and brawls were common. An enforcer didn't have to be the best player. He had to be able to fight. Ada had once loved the sport and even said American football would be more interesting if fighting were allowed. She'd noted the similarity between an enforcer and a beater. Both help win by injuring or blocking opposing core players, one with fists, the other with a bat and bludgers. We'll sort it out. We'll talk to Oliver. George decided for her. If he really can't find a seeker, you'll take the spot. From now on, you'll be Gryffindor's enforcer. Let's see who dares steal the snitch from you. Fred crowed. Ada had never expected a throwaway remark about an ice hockey enforcer to stick with the twins. She certainly hadn't imagined she was digging her own trap. Many unjust acts lead to self-destruction. Apparently, she'd just dug a very tidy hole for herself. Fred and George were not all talk. Once they had come up with a plan, however shaky, they were determined to act on it. Without wasting another minute, the twins hauled Esmeralda out of Twilight Cottage and back to the castle, tugging and protesting all the way. Students who saw the three of them were astonished. Kidnapping a girl in broad daylight? Under a clear sky? It was brazen even for the two troublemakers. They dragged Esmeralda straight into the common room. George stayed with her while Fred hurried off to the boys' dormitory to fetch Oliver Wood. The common room was lively for a weekend, but no one paid the unusual trio much mind. After all, one set of faces belonged to the Weasley twins and the other to the formidable Esmeralda. People were still buzzing about Harry Potter, and conversation mostly orbited him anyway. Before Wood arrived, the team's three chasers, Angelina, Alicia, and Katie, had come down, intending only to say hello, and George promptly detained them. The three, fresh from a meeting and bewildered by this sudden one, exchanged confused looks. Had the twins found some secret weapon? When Wood finally appeared, his hair was mussed as though someone had been pulling at it. He sank into an armchair, rubbing his temples. What exactly do you two want? I still need to compare the applicants to see who's best for the chaser position, he snapped. If the twins couldn't give him a good explanation, he muttered he'd train them into the ground. We've just finished a meeting. Why another? Angelina asked, and Alicia echoed her question. Esmeralda didn't say anything. Katie Bell, the youngest and newest pick, had nothing to contribute. Of course it's about the team, George said matter-of-factly. He and Fred looked at Esmeralda as if to say, you don't know how hard this was. The fire in the hearth popped, and the Quidditch players fell silent. All of them knew the team's problem, but no obvious solution had presented itself. Speak quickly. If this is a terrible idea, you two are dead, and Charlie won't be able to save you, Wood grated. We've already found a chaser, Fred announced, practically bouncing. She's not perfect, but she'll get us through. And Oliver, you'll never get knocked off your broom by Slytherin again. Who? The four other players demanded in unison, eyes fixed on the twins. Fred and George swiveled and pointed at Esmeralda. Miss Esmeralda Twister, they announced grandly. Esmeralda obligingly raised a hand in a small, embarrassed wave. Wood's fingers twitched as though he'd like to thump them both. Angelina, think about it, she said after a pause. Esmeralda has improved a lot, but she's still not on a par with Cedric, is she? Angelina wasn't sneering. She was stating what everyone knew. If there were an award for fastest improvement, Esmeralda would win it hands down, but that was largely because she'd been so hopeless in the first place. We're together all the time, George protested. Cedric's our neighbor. We see the difference. But we didn't pick Esmeralda because she's a brilliant flyer. There are other things we value. Don't get the wrong idea. Tell us your plan. I want to hear it all. Then I'll decide, Wood said through gritted teeth, already bracing himself to put the twins in their place. Fred launched into it with all the confidence of a born salesman. It might sound odd at first, but hear us out. Esmeralda can temporarily fill the chaser vacancy. If we had a quaffle like Charlie, George added, we wouldn't even be talking about this, but we don't, so this is a last resort. The twins had a knack for selling even their most far-fetched ideas. No wonder their wares did such good business. They explained their reasoning. Esmeralda didn't have to be the best flyer or the most brilliant scorer. Her presence on the pitch would act as a deterrent. Teams, especially Slytherin, had learned not to provoke Gryffindor in the past 2 years because of her. Lower years had always given Gryffindor a wide berth. After she'd taken care of Flint, the older Slytherins also stopped being so bold. Who would want to be on the receiving end of Esmeralda's poisonous hands? Avery and Flint had already found out the hard way. There was talk, too, about the old first-year incident, the Fooley incident, rumored to involve Esmeralda, and combined with her general reputation around school, everyone from all 4 houses knew not to pick a fight with her. If she were on the field, the twins argued, she wouldn't have to do anything dramatic to affect the match. Her mere presence would knock at least a few points off the other side's morale. Maybe an exaggeration, but then school matches are played by teenagers, not professionals. As their excitement began to spread through the cluster of players, Esmeralda forced herself to speak. She could feel the situation slipping away into fantasy. She had to bring them back down. "Don't you see how Slytherin this is?" she said sharply. "We're talking about using me as a scarecrow. What if they're not afraid? That new Slytherin Malfoy wasn't even scared of Harry." Angelina shrugged in the way of someone with a scarred memory. "It's a deterrent, that's all. Last match, Slytherin knocked me off my broom, and I was in the hospital wing for days. With Esmeralda on the pitch, do you think they'll still send 2 big boys crashing in?" Fred shot Angelina a triumphant look. She shot back a look of approval. Seeing the two exchange that private giddy glance was too much for Esmeralda. Angelina, of all people, was siding with the twins. "Oliver, calm down and listen," Esmeralda said directly to Wood, who had the final say. "It's not a certainty they'll be scared. We can't assume that." Wood's decision came faster than expected. "Fred, George, you two will train her for the next few days," he ordered. "I'll speak to Professor McGonagall. I'll keep looking for a proper chaser, but if I can't find one, Esmeralda will play." It felt abrupt. The call was made hastily. Wood left the common room at once, obviously to seek McGonagall's approval. Esmeralda's 3 roommates, after a few encouraging words, also drifted away, leaving only Esmeralda and the twins. Fred and George crouched down beside her, grinning like 2 madmen. "Welcome to the Gryffindor Quidditch team," they chorused. 158, the starting position that isn't hot. Ada thought Oliver Wood should calm down, but he marched straight to Professor McGonagall. Ida had been sure McGonagall would never go along with such nonsense. She had forgotten, as she so often did, that Professor McGonagall was a Gryffindor through and through. Still, McGonagall didn't share the extravagant notions of the twins or of Wood. She simply thought Ida would benefit from more sport, especially Quidditch. Whether Ida actually played in a match mattered less to her than the experience. If she could play, she should try. If she couldn't, it would be character building. So Ida was pre-selected, given the same courtesy Katie Bell had received. Katie had earned her place by pure ability. Ida had it partly because of influence. If no better candidate emerged in the week following tryouts, it was to take the field wearing the number 7. The number 7 had a reputation, of course. In the Muggle world and the Wizarding one, 7 was a lucky, even legendary number. It felt like a small, private honor. Tryouts had been held on a bright afternoon in the second week of term. Katie Bell proved she deserved her chaser place, and no one was going to take it from her. With Katie confirmed, Gryffindor's offensive line would be in the hands of 3 girls. Wood combed the school for quaffle talent and found nothing outstanding. A promising second year, Cormac McLagan showed ability, but also an unpredictable temper that made him unsuitable for development. Ada had been preparing to accept the substitute role and to put her energy into practice and fitness until a surprising announcement changed everything. Professor McGonagall had found a quaffle. The news broke on a Thursday, after tryouts had officially ended. Wood had nearly worn a hole in his application forms looking for recruits. McGonagall, from her office, had dug up the solution as if by magic. Ada was in Ancient Runes at the time, next to Cedric Diggory. They were listening to Professor Babbling's lecture and his unstoppable complaining. Cedric, having played apple Quidditch with Ida over the holidays, guessed why she'd been on Wood's list. She was strong, but not your natural quaffle in his opinion. Ada told him the truth without hesitation. There wasn't much to hide. Everyone could guess a little of why she'd been put forward. When class ended, the twins were waiting by the door with the news. Ida's nearly warm starting spot chilled into substitute in a heartbeat. The new quaffle? Harry Potter. He dived 50 feet and grabbed it, not a scratch on him. Charlie Weasley couldn't have done that, Fred recited, borrowing McGonagall's exact words with glee. George added, he must be the youngest player in decades. McGonagall wouldn't bend the rules for just anyone. Ida let herself grin. Youngest in a century, maybe, she said. And if you'd been more thorough when you cleaned the trophy room, you'd have seen Harry's father's name. He was a superb Quidditch player, helped Gryffindor win a cup once. You're talking too much for someone who won't even have to play, Fred teased. Aren't you terrified of Quidditch? Ida stopped and answered seriously. I'm not afraid of Quidditch or of looking foolish. I'm afraid of disappointing Professor McGonagall. If I can't do it, I shouldn't give her false hope. That's cruel. For the moment, threats like Snape or Quirrell faded into the background. If Ida could steer clear of other dark business, this would be a very good year. The three of them drifted to the Great Hall and sat at the long Gryffindor table right beside Harry. Congratulations, Ida said, already helping herself to a pie. Youngest quaffle, eh? Don't worry, George murmured into Harry's ear. We're all on the team. Me and Fred are beaters, and Ada was bumped off her quaffle spot for you. Harry looked flustered. I didn't even know she'd been chosen, he tried to explain. It's fine, Fred said, patting Harry's shoulder. Ada only had the slot for a day anyway. She's probably thanking you in pie. She'll definitely eat a few more today, George predicted with certainty. Malfoy appeared with Crabbe and Goyle, not to congratulate, of course, but to provoke. The teacher's table was well-staffed, and Ida and the twins were beside Harry, so Malfoy could only manage a few thin threats before slinking off, though he did agree to a duel with Harry before he left. Ada had no interest in engaging him. He was careful enough with his words that day to be barely worth her attention. Do you want me to show you a few tricks? Ida offered Harry when she saw him looking nervous about the duel. I'll teach him something, and he'll think twice before bothering you again. A duel between first years was mostly a display of sparks. Nothing fatal, nothing dramatic. Ron, suddenly braver with friends at his side, urged her on. Yes, Ida, teach Harry a few moves. He's strong. I'd say only the professors could beat him. Before she could demonstrate, Wood called her away. He comforted her, not that she particularly minded losing the official starting spot, and then laid out his plan. Publicly, Gryffindor would still list Ida as the starting quaffle, a little deception to mislead opponents and perhaps to intimidate them. Harry would be kept as a secret weapon to be revealed at the right moment. Ida agreed. She wanted to do her best for the team, and she felt she owed Harry for saving her twice. What came next, however, made her rethink even that small gratitude. She found herself envying Harry in a way she hadn't expected. 159. Three-headed dog and trapdoor people with nothing to worry about slept soundly. Those with things on their mind rarely did. Ada was no exception. Her inexplicable appointment as the starting Quidditch chaser, the student chosen to handle the quaffle, kept her awake, unable to eat or sleep properly. It wasn't that she lacked nerve. If she had been told to sit an exam the next day or to pick a fight, she would have been excited. Those were things she knew how to handle, things that depended only on her. Quidditch was different. It was a team sport, and handling the quaffle was an important match-deciding role. Ada, king of the keyboard warriors but with zero real match experience, felt insecure. If the team lost because of her, she could selfishly ignore what her teammates thought. She couldn't bear the idea of Professor McGonagall being disappointed in her. For now, she didn't have to force herself onto the pitch. As long as Harry stayed healthy, she would sit out. Being called a substitute chaser was more like being a warm body on the bench. Friday's potions class was oddly quiet. Snape didn't ask her a single question. Their interactions were so smooth it felt almost unnatural, as if the last 2 years had been imagined. Rumor had it that Snape didn't wash his hair because all the magical shampoos were somehow connected to the Potter family, but nobody wanted to test that theory. Nobody wanted Snape's greasy hair in their face. That evening, Oliver Wood took Harry out to the pitch for some basic training and to help him choose a broom. Buying a broom was an ordeal for Ada. Harry could afford the most expensive models without thinking. The Potters had been rich for generations. Fleamont Potter, Harry's grandfather, had invented Sleek Easy's hair potion and left the family with a fortune, even if the company no longer belonged to them. Ada, on the other hand, came from the slums. They were in different worlds. After curfew, the common room grew quiet, lit only by the fireplace. Most of the Gryffindors were asleep, but Ada and the Weasley twins slipped out. They intended to explore the fourth floor. Ada's disillusionment charm had saved the twins from many a late-night detention over the years, cutting down the number of times they were caught sneaking around. Their point scoring for the House Cup had more or less canceled each other out. Their usual formation, Fred in front, Ada in the middle, George at the rear, had held for 2 years. Ada had wanted to lead sometimes, but she never said so. Boys needed their pride tended to. They climbed stair after stair and crossed corridor after corridor until they reached the end of the fourth floor. It had only been 2 weeks since Dumbledore's speech, but the three of them still wanted to know what sort of danger could lead to such a strict warning. Ada approached the locked door and whispered, "Alohomora." The lock clicked. The lock was a flimsy ward if ever there was one. She pushed the door open, and the three of them filed in, the corridor stretching away to the right, and a dog filled the space. It was enormous, its body occupying the corridor from floor to ceiling. It had 3 heads, each with a pair of rolling, fierce eyes, 3 wet noses twitching in their direction, and 3 mouths drooling thick ropes of saliva over yellowed teeth. The Cerberus stood perfectly still. The disillusionment charm had no effect on it. It cocked its heads and stared at the 3 small figures. The dog had noticed visitors these past 2 nights. Had they been snacks? The giant creature lowered itself and crept forward. Each head had its share of attention. The meal that had escaped last night wouldn't get away tonight. The moment Ada saw the beast, she understood why the lock had been so weak. In Greek myth, Cerberus guards the underworld. In the wizarding world, it was no less fearsome. Not just anyone could handle such a guardian. Ada raised her wand and drew a circle in the air. Flames burst from its tip, forming a towering wall of fire between them and the dog. The Cerberus snorted with outrage, its bark a thunder that made the corridor ache. The stench from its mouth was terrible. The 3 knew they had to go. The noise would attract Filch or a professor sooner or later. George twisted the doorknob, and he and Fred slipped through first. The wall of fire Ada had conjured coalesced into a great firebird and flew toward the Cerberus. One of its heads opened and swallowed the flaming bird whole. When it looked back, the 3 kids had already vanished from the corridor. The beast's anger echoed behind them. After they relocked the door, Ada and the twins hurried off toward Gryffindor Tower. Filch and Mrs. Norris arrived at the scene almost immediately. Filch, finding nothing, prowled and poked, hoping for signs of visitors. The trio woke the fat lady and slipped into the common room, dispelled the disillusionment charm, and sank into armchairs by the fire. "Your eyes weren't just for show, were they? You saw it too?" Fred asked softly. Even though the Cerberus had blocked their path, they'd seen enough. "Of course," Ada said. "That dog was guarding a trapdoor." There, under the creature's massive paws, lay a huge trapdoor. Any attentive eye could see it. Dumbledore must have placed such a fearsome guardian to watch over whatever lay beneath. There must be something incredible underneath, and maybe more creatures like that down there, George murmured. "Wait, Cerberus." "Hagrid," the 3 said together. They had all thought of the same man. Hagrid had once bought a Cerberus from a Greek wizard and kept it in the Forbidden Forest. He'd even shown it to the trio. The twins began grumbling about Hagrid, mostly because the dog blocked their way. Ada settled back and let her mind go over recent events. 2 heads are better than 1, she thought, and asked, "Do you remember the Gringotts robbery?" Thanks to book friend Luoyue Rugeng for the reward. 160. Hagrid is not easy to fool. Gringotts, the largest banking institution in the wizarding world, had been broken into at the end of July, a sensational story that dominated the front page of the Daily Prophet for a week. Everyone considered Gringotts impregnable. The robbery was a shock. The goblins insisted none of the vaults had lost contents, and that the vault the robber had visited was already empty, its contents apparently taken long before. But they refused to say what the treasure had been, no matter how much they were pressed. "You're not suggesting the thing the robber wanted is at Hogwarts, are you?" George asked uncertainly. "Hidden under a trapdoor? It's not impossible." Ada found the idea mildly amusing. "Don't forget, Hogwarts is supposed to be the safest place in the world, though it certainly isn't safe for me." "Hold on, let me go over it from the beginning," Fred said, pacing in front of the fireplace. "It's possible, but it feels far-fetched. Why would someone put something like that at Hogwarts? Does it even belong here?" Ada hesitated. She didn't know. "This is my guess," she said finally. "Quirrell was at the Leaky Cauldron that day, and Hagrid and Harry were there too. Harry had shopping to do, so Hagrid would have taken him to Gringotts. The robbery happened that afternoon, and the item wasn't in Gringotts. Coincidence?" "You've seen Quirrell since the start of the term," Fred scoffed. "He's a useless mess. How could someone like that break into Gringotts and get away with it? The goblins would have caught him." "What if Quirrell is acting?" Ada suggested, rubbing her earlobe. "What if he wants everyone to see him as useless?" George shivered. "Then he's terrifying. That thing must mean everything to him, so important he'd throw everything away for it. People will do anything for sufficient reward, tolerate scorn, fake incompetence, or risk everything to win power or fame. Who would remember Quirrell's stutter if he later succeeded and rose to greatness?" As Ida thought about it, the more obvious the stakes seemed. "The most important thing is to find out exactly what's under the trapdoor and whether Hagrid brought it back," George said. "Once we know that, everything becomes simpler." Fred agreed. "We'll sound Hagrid out tomorrow and see if he slips up." Their plan was the same as Ida's. For now, they couldn't get past Fluffy silently, so they would change tactics. Could a living person be stalled by a simple problem? Possibly. Ada had a way to get past Fluffy. She could kill the creature, but that would make far too much commotion and cost her more than she cared to pay. "Oh, right," Fred said as they were saying goodnight. "Next time we go to see Fluffy, should we bring Galleon?" Ada blinked. Galleon was a female dog. Was Fred proposing a honey dog? Strategy? The size difference alone made the idea laughable. Seeing her confusion, George explained, "Let Galleon see how other dogs guard a house. They're both dogs. Why such a big difference?" The comparison was dubious, but it amused them nonetheless. The next morning, not sleeping late for once, Ida and the twins took Galleon to Hagrid's hut. Hagrid and Fang greeted them warmly. Hagrid fussed over the students while Fang sniffed at Galleon. A huge pot of tea and a plate piled high with rock cakes were already on the table. Hagrid kept urging them to eat, but Ida refused. She'd sooner preserve her teeth than risk one of Hagrid's notorious baked goods. The twins began their questioning obliquely. Direct questions would only put Hagrid on guard. They started with care of magical creatures, feigning keen interest. Their acting was much better than it had been in their first year. Had Ida not known them, she might have believed they genuinely loved the subject. Hagrid beamed, pleased as could be, his eyes squinting and his beard hiding whatever teeth he might be showing. As the morning wore on, the conversation shifted toward Fluffy. The twins asked about the colossal three-headed dog, and Hagrid confirmed that the creature was indeed his. But he'd lent Fluffy to Dumbledore, and he couldn't be seen right now. Hagrid also mentioned that Fluffy liked music, which the twins noted eagerly. But when they pushed further, Hagrid grew reluctant. Perhaps they'd been too mischievous for him before. He'd clearly become suspicious. Where Hagrid was usually loose-lipped, he now shut up. No amount of leading would make him explain why Dumbledore had borrowed Fluffy. The atmosphere became awkward as the twins tried every trick to needle answers out of him, and Hagrid stubbornly shifted the topic. While the tug-of-war went on, Ida let her eyes wander around the hut. She toyed with the ring on her left hand, a ring with a passive effect called unwavering devotion, which could keep her from being swayed and, in turn, influence those of weaker will. She considered slipping it on to test Hagrid's resolve, but before she could decide, something else caught her eye, a clipping of the Daily Prophet pinned among other papers. The date on the clipping was August. The headline was about the Gringotts robbery. It was odd. Everything in the hut had to do with magical creatures, and an old newspaper clipping about a bank heist was out of place. That the clipping had been kept deliberately was telling. Ida gave a subtle look to the twins. They halted their questioning immediately. You couldn't fool someone who was already on guard, and they weren't going to push and risk alienating Hagrid. They changed the subject to Charlie Weasley in Romania, and Hagrid visibly relaxed. By noon, they left for the castle. On the way back, Ida explained why she'd called off the interrogation. Hagrid's on his guard. Keep pushing and you'll get nothing, and make him resentful. Besides, I found something important, so it's all right that he didn't tell us today. She described the clipping and her reading of it. The twins agreed. It all pointed to the same conclusion. The thing taken from Gringotts must be connected to Hagrid, otherwise why would he care about the robbery? None of the vaults at Gringotts belonged to him, so he must be worried for another reason. Now that they knew how to approach Fluffy and suspected Hagrid's involvement, they didn't have to solve everything at once. The rest of the term stretched ahead. There was no need to rush. Dumbledore wasn't in any hurry, and neither were they. They had time to wait and watch.